Welcome, wrestling fans, to the Pro Wrestle Machine. Whether you're tuning in from the Great American Bash or halfway around the world, we've got a jam-packed episode for you. Get ready to dive into wrestling's rich history, packed with insights, opinions, and a few surprises. And remember, you can skip to your favorite moments with our chapter markers. Let's jump right into it. May 22, 2000 Observer Newsletter. Jumbo Tsuruta passes away, ECW Hardcore Heaven Review. By Dave Meltzer. Tomomi Tsuruta, who started out as an instant sensation and went on to be one of the most enduring stars in pro wrestling history, passed away at 4 p.m. on May 13 from complications after undergoing a kidney transplant operation in the Philippines. He was 49. Tsuruta was an undisputable Hall of Fame caliber performer. He was a major star in pro wrestling literally from the first week of his career in Japan. He was the country's first truly elite-level world-class worker and was still arguably the best worker in the business at the time he first took ill, which largely sealed his career 2 decades later. In wrestling, he was known for nearly 3 decades by one word: Jumbo. It was a nickname chosen for him in a contest sponsored by NTV in Japan a few weeks after his debut in the country after being a celebrated amateur wrestler. He was the first wrestler to hold the Triple Crown, the first native Japanese wrestler to capture the AWA World Heavyweight title, and in the late 70s was under somewhat serious consideration to hold the NWA World Heavyweight title, which at the time was the major belt in the wrestling world. Press coverage in Japan on May 16, when the story broke, called Tsuruta the strongest wrestler in the history of Japanese wrestling. In polls for both the decade of the 80s and 90s, fans voted Tsuruta as the strongest native wrestler. Every newspaper, radio station and television station covered the death strongly as he was something of a household name in his culture, with it being the lead story in virtually every sports section. Funeral services were pending at press time as his wife and 3 children were scheduled to return to Japan on May 17. During the 70s, Tsuruta was considered right at the top of any list of the best workers of the decade, alongside the likes of the Funks, Harley Race and Jack Briscoe, with a believable high-spot athletic style that was ahead of its time in that he was one of the few wrestlers of that era whose matches still hold up well under today's standards. He was the first Japanese wrestler to be a world-class worker at a mixture of both American and Japanese styles, having trained under Dory Funk Jr. and having classic matches with the top scientific wrestlers of the era like Briscoe, Dory Funk Jr., Billy Robinson, Race, Nick Bockwinkel, Mil Mascaras and Vern Gagne, which aired on prime-time network television every Saturday night, making him a sports celebrity who was a household cultural name. With the exception of Giant Baba, Rikidozan, and Antonio Inoki, and possibly Riki Choshu, he was as famous a cultural name as any native pro wrestler in Japanese history. He remained a main eventer throughout the 80s. The emergence of a new faster-paced style culminating in multiple near falls that came in, combined with him getting older and bigger, and toning down his impressive high flying for such a big man of his youth, left him somewhat behind the top few guys in the business, although he was still considered one of the most important Japanese wrestlers, and was virtually always in the main events. By the late 80s and early 90s, he modernized his style to keep up with the pack, and his matches against the likes of Mitsuharu Misawa, Toshiaki Kawada, Genichiro Tenryu, and Kenta Kobashi were the state-of-the-art for in-ring world title matches at the time. By that point in time, he was considered with the likes of Jushin Liger and Ric Flair as the best in-ring performer in the business, as the dominant player in the hottest promotion in the world. Then, just as suddenly, his career, at least as a serious performer, was over. He became ill in the summer of 1982. It was said to have been an ankle injury, but when he came back to the ring 6 weeks later, he had lost a lot of weight, mainly muscle mass, and clearly was not the same. His stamina was no longer there, and tag team partner Akira Taue had to carry the action in his matches, which were still headlining the shows. A few months later, he disappeared again. His illness was never explained to the public, which started rumors flying everywhere. He didn't return to the ring until 11 months later, at which time it was said he had been out of action from contracting hepatitis B, but from that point on his wrestling was limited to appearing in mid-card 6-man tag team matches where he'd only been in for a minute or less at a time. While he wrestled 5 to 10 matches per year over the next 5 years, the Jumbo Tsuruta that every wrestling fan in Japan knew really was finished in 1992. He earned his teaching credential in 1994 and went back to college in 1995. He became a professor of sports physiology in 1996 and went back to his alma mater, Chuo College, to teach in 1997, where he earned his law degree some 25 years earlier. He left Japan in the fallout of the death of Shohei Baba early last year, being pressured out of his front office position began teaching physical education at the University of Portland. He was contemplating switching to UCLA, but apparently he took a turn for the worse toward the end of the year due to cancer, which was kept secret. He quietly returned to Japan, unbeknownst to all but his closest friends, for treatment in Gifu, Japan, at the most famous hospital in the country for treatment of liver problems, as the cancer had spread from his kidneys to his liver. He left the hospital for Australia on April 11th. He had an operation to try and remove the cancer in Brisbane, Australia, and was recuperating there, but still needed a kidney transplant and was awaiting a donor. Internal organ transplant laws in Japan are very complicated, which is why he had left Japan for treatment and was recuperating in Australia. He also wanted treatment outside of the United States or Japan so it would be done without any fanfare. He received word last week that a donor had been found, a 17-year-old in the Philippines who had been murdered. He flew to Manila and underwent transplant surgery on May 13th at the National Kidney Hospital in Manila, but passed away following the surgery from heavy internal bleeding. Rumors of his death spread quickly on May 14th in Japan, but because nobody could confirm it, they weren't reported anywhere until May 16th in Japan, the evening of May 15th in the United States. Even as late as May 16th, his older brother wasn't aware that he had left Australia for the transplant or that he had passed away. A few hours later, All Japan held a press conference. He was survived by his wife, Yasuko, a former stewardess he had married in 1984, and 3 sons. Tomomi Tsuruta was born March 25, 1951 in the small town of Makiika in the Yamanashi Prefecture of Japan. Because his first name sounded so much like Tomoko, a popular first name for girls, he was teased greatly, but grew up to be an excellent athlete. At Hikawa High School, he was a star on the swimming team, was the star player on his high school basketball team which won the Japanese High School National Championship during his senior year in 1970, and placed 3rd in his prefecture as a senior in sumo wrestling that same year. He went to Chuo College in Tokyo as a basketball player and studied law. While he had done sumo, he did no amateur wrestling before reading a magazine article in early 1971 about the 1960 Olympics, in particular the Japanese wrestling team. The article inspired him to try amateur wrestling as his quest to participate in the 1976 Olympics, and he ended up reaching his goal 4 years early. He wasn't of Olympic team caliber in basketball and sumo wasn't in the Olympics, which led him to amateur wrestling. He actually quit the basketball team to go out for wrestling, a decision that everyone at his college thought was nuts since he was tall and thin, built like a basketball player and had potential in that sport. The wrestlers on the didn't want him and wouldn't let him join the team. He was ribbed about his name and his slight physique, and Chuo College already had a star heavyweight, Tetsuo Sekigawa, who was the ringleader of those who teased Tsuruta and blocked him from joining the team, and who later became a famous pro wrestler under the name Mr. Pogo. Tsuruta, pressured away from joining the college team, instead took up wrestling with an outside club, the Ground Self-Defense Force, and picked up the amateur sport, as he later did the pro sport, with miraculous speed. He whipped on people left and right in local tournaments to where the college team changed its tune and quickly were begging him to join. He picked it up so quickly he won the Japanese Collegiate Heavyweight Championship in both freestyle and Greco-Roman in both 1971 and 1972. He qualified for the Olympic team, and in late August of 1972, went to Munich after only 18 months in the sport, which was totally unheard of. He won his first 2 matches and then lost via decision in the 3rd round to place 7th overall. At 6'4" and about 225 pounds at the time, very large for a Japanese athlete in those days, he came out of the Olympics like a #1 draft choice in football as it pertained to the pro wrestling world, which came after him with lucrative offers. All 4 wrestling promotions at the time, the old JWA, which was in bad financial condition and needed a savior, the UA, which was affiliated with the AWA in the United States, and the 2 new groups which had just formed but had most of the major stars, Shohei Baba's All Japan Pro Wrestling and Antonio Inoki's New Japan Pro Wrestling. On October 31, 1972, 10 days after Baba formed All Japan, a press conference with Baba, the biggest wrestling star in the country at the time, Ichiro Hata, the president of the Japanese Amateur Wrestling Federation, and Tsuruta, heavyweight star of the Olympic team, together to announce the first major signee of the new promotion. He was predestined for stardom before ever having a match. 4 days after signing, the media was invited to his first day in wrestling camp under Akio Sato and the late Masao Koma at the new All Japan Dojo, where he demonstrated 4 different types of suplexes. After 4 months of training in Japan, he was sent to Amarillo, Texas, to train under the NWA World Heavyweight Champion Dory Funk Jr. and make his pro debut. He arrived on March 23, 1973. The Funks knew of his Olympic background, but due to miscommunication and the language barrier at the time, had no idea he had never actually had a pro wrestling match when they put him in the ring for a television taping match the next day against veteran El Gran Tapia. Tommy Tsuruta, as he was known at the time, became the first Japanese wrestler, and perhaps only one, to get over as a major draw as a babyface without playing the stereotypical Japanese gimmick in an American territory. His suplexes were so impressive that he became the first wrestler ever in the Amarillo territory to have his moves replayed in slow motion. His 3 big suplexes, including what is now known in pro wrestling as a German suplex, which was a new move for that territory and rarely seen in the United States up to that point in time, would be taped onto 16mm film and transferred back on slow-mo mode on the videotape, as they actually didn't have slow-mo equipment in those days. Tsuruta became largely a Japanese incarnation of Dory Jr., his trainer, because of his unique ability to see almost any maneuver in the ring and ability to duplicate it almost instinctively. He almost instantly mastered the European uppercut forearm and the spinning toe hold, as well as the double arm suplex, as well as copying Jack Briscoe, considered by many as the best athlete in wrestling in those days with the high-flying moves, including being the originator of the missile drop kick and specializing in a high knee called the jumping knee pat. And later, they had him train under Lou Thez, and he used Thez's trademark Greco-Roman backdrop as a regular finisher. Besides the missile dropkick, a move which in the 70s became his domain, he also on occasion did the plancha, a move largely exclusive to very small high flyers in Mexico. He got over so quickly that he was a main eventer only a few weeks after his first match. Just 8 weeks after his first pro match, on March 20, 1973 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, he challenged Dory to a world title match, losing in 56 minutes of a 2 of 3 fall match to the spinning toe hold, 4 days before the famous match where Dory dropped the title to Race in Kansas City after a 4-year-plus reign. No other Japanese native had ever gotten over playing the role of scientific babyface to that degree in American wrestling. Keiji Muto could have nearly 2 decades later, but was miscast due to the belief among those in charge of WCW at the time is that American fans would never cheer a Japanese wrestler. He was a fun kid to be around and wrestle. Remember Dory Funk Jr.? He liked Texas. I'd take him out to work the cattle and brand the steers. He could do pretty much of everything. We wanted to keep him here in Amarillo. He was able to draw money for us, but they called him back. Tsuruta got preferential treatment when he returned to Japan. He had signed a big money, by the standards of the era, contract, and didn't have to pay the dues a typical Japanese wrestler had to. It would have caused problems within the hierarchy in the Japanese traditional wrestling culture, but Tsuruta was such an impressive athlete that nobody could complain his monster push wasn't deserved. When he debuted in Japan to much fanfare on October 6, 1973 at Korakuen Hall, he was a magnet for resentment from veterans. In his first match, he beat large foreign mid-Carter Moose Muroski. His third match in Japan, on October 9, 1973 at Tokyo Sumo Hall, saw he and Baba wrestle to a 60-minute draw when challenging Dory and Terry Funk for the International Tag Team titles, held on live television, by the end of which, he had shut up all the complainers. The Chuo College Band, and tons of college students who weren't wrestling fans, packed the building to create a unique atmosphere for the television audience. He was an instant celebrity and the hottest new star in Japanese pro wrestling since Baba and Inoki had gotten over. A contest was held on NTV to give him a nickname, and on October 27, 1973 Jumbo Tsuruta became a household name. He was kept unbeaten in Japan until January 30, 1974, when he lost when challenging for Briscoe's NWA title and was named by the Japanese press as the best technical wrestler in the world in 1974. Baba and Tsuruta had replaced Baba and the Destroyer as the top babyface tag team in Japan, and they finally captured the international tag team titles from the Funks on February 5, 1975 in San Antonio in Tsuruta's first title win. The two teams had numerous main events during that period and for the next 8 years. Besides wins over the Funks, the Baba and Tsuruta team became recognized as the top tag team in Japan, retaining the belts against teams like Killer Kowalski and Gene Kiniski, Kowalski and Bruno Sammartino, and 2 wins over Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher. In late 1975, after a loss in a singles match to Baba, Baba announced what everyone had figured, that Tsuruta would someday be his successor, and to groom him the next year would be his learning year, as they would bring the top wrestlers in the world in to face him in singles matches. His opponents over the next year included Ganya, Rusher Kimura, the top star of the rival Iway, in what at the time was a major interpromotional match which was voted Match of the Year the first of 5 consecutive years, where its Tsuruta match won Match of the Year in Japan. Kentaro Oki, the biggest wrestling star in Korea, Billy Robinson, considered Europe's best wrestler at the time, and the two wrestled a 70-minute draw which may have been the longest in-ring match in Japanese history before the Hoist Gracie vs. Kazushi Sakuraba match. Jack Briscoe, Bobo Brazil, Abdullah the Butcher, Chris Taylor, who also competed in the 1972 Munich Olympics, and finished behind Tsuruta, although they never wrestled, in Greco-Roman, although captured a bronze medal in freestyle, Terry Funk race, and Fritz von Erich. They also revived the old United National title, the belt that the old JWA had given to Inoki, to be a slightly lesser but arguably equal version of the international title that Baba dominated. The idea is the international title was the king belt, but the real great technical wrestlers would wrestle for the UN belt, which Tsuruta dominated from 1976-83 after for the first time finally beating Jack Briscoe, and defended against the likes of Robinson, who he lost and regained the belt from, Mascaras, Wahoo McDaniel, Ric Flair, Tommy Rich, Ted DiBiase, Dick Slater, Jimmy Snuka, and Dick Murdoch. During that period, besides headlining against every major star of the era, he also put out 3 record albums as a singer and guitar player on the Sony label to capitalize on his mainstream fame. He was also pushed at NWA board meetings as a possible world heavyweight champion during the period when Race was kingpin, but it never happened. He also had several matches against AWA champion Nick Bockwinkel. The first headlining in Honolulu on February 14, 1979. All Japan in the late 70s and early 80s was built around Baba and Tsuruta as the top stars, feuding with all the top foreigners of the era. By the early 80s, since Tsuruta was younger, the better worker and far more believable as an athlete, there was a lot of pressure for Baba to step down from NTV, which at that point owned the majority interest in the company. Over time, the Baba family bought back to where they owned 85% of the stock. When Ric Flair came to Japan as NWA World Champion on October 9, 1981 for the first time, it was Tsuruta and not Baba that he worked his program with, since Baba was past the point of having the kind of world title match that would have worked Flair's strengths. They had a famous rematches in Japan, a 60 minutes match on June 8, 1983, with Tsuruta taking one fall in a best-of-3 fall match and thus not winning the title. Baba's feud with Stan Hansen kept him as the top draw in 1982, but without any major fanfare. In 1983, when Tsuruta beat Bruiser Brody to win the international heavyweight title, he had kind of quietly taken the top dog spot, particularly in 1984 when Tsuruta and Genichiro Tenryu captured the real World Tag League. On February 23, 1984 at Sumo Hall in Tokyo, he pinned Bockwinkel in 32 minutes to win the AWA World Heavyweight title in a match with the NWA International title also at stake, with Terry Funk as referee. He toured the United States during a period when AWA business was very strong, headlining shows against the top names in the promotion including Bockwinkel, Blackjack Lanza, Robinson, Jim Brunzel, Greg Gagne and Baron von Rasch, before dropping it to Rick Martel on May 13, 1984 at the St. Paul Civic Center. 9 days later at the Dinan Coliseum in Tokyo, he had a tremendous match against then NWA champion Kerry Von Erich, which went to a double count out. He publicly announced his engagement to the former Yasuko Aramaki on July 10, 1984 at the Hotel Okura in Tokyo, and was married on September 23 of that year. All Japan was on fire from 1985 to 1987 when Riki Choshu and his army jumped from New Japan. This was the period where Tsuruta was almost caught napping. They introduced a faster-paced style, and Tsuruta, content to do the old big man heavyweight style, seemed to be passed by Tenryu as the hottest All Japan regular in the top program with Choshu, while Tsuruta worked programs with less interest against the big foreigners. But by 1987, Tsuruta upped his game. Choshu and company had gone back to New Japan and Tenryu was turned heel and their singles feud started, with Tenryu scoring a win on August 11, 1987 at Budokan Hall, which that year became the home base for All Japan major shows. Tsuruta vs Tenryu on top started a trend that has lasted until the present, where All Japan presented the best singles main events held anywhere in the world. Tsuruta was the catalyst in Baba cutting down to 2 major titles, a singles triple crown and a double tag team, combining the PWF World Tag Team titles with the long-existing NWA International belts. The tag belts were unified in 1988 when Tsuruta and Yoshiaki Yatsu, who represented Japan in the 1980 Olympics, known as the Olympics, beat Tenryu and Ashurahara on June 4 in Sapporo for the PWF belts, and then on June 10 at Budokan Hall beat the Road Warriors for the international belts, and began a feud with Hansen and Terry Gordy. The Triple Crown unification came on April 18, 1989 at the Tokyo Oda Ward Gymnasium. Tsuruta won the international title from Bruiser Brody on April 19, 1988, then defeated Hansen, who held both the United National and PWF belts in the unification match, and then feuded with Tenryu, Hansen, Gordy, Williams and Misawa over it until his career as a headliner was over. He had his only major singles match with Kobashi on January 27, 1990, and his famous singles match with Kawada was on January 21, 1992. When Tenryu left the promotion in 1990 to form Super World Sports, and took a lot of the mid-card wrestlers with him, All Japan had to reinvent itself, and Tsuruta ushered in the modern era on June 8, 1990 when he was pinned by Misawa before 14,800 fans at Budokan Hall. The win made Misawa the hottest wrestler in the country, and All Japan caught fire for the next few years with Tsuruta and Misawa on top, both in key singles matches, which Tsuruta usually won, and in numerous forms of tag matches, in particular six-mans. The Misawa win over Tsuruta, which came a few hundred tickets shy of capacity, was the last All Japan show not to sell out in Tokyo for the next several years. Tsuruta chose Akira Taue as his tag team partner for classics with Misawa and Kawada, before the illness that ended his career. His last important main event was on October 21, 1982, at the All Japan Company's 20th anniversary show at Budokan Hall, where he teamed with Gordy and Andre the Giant to beat Baba and Hansen and Dory when he finally pinned his teacher. His final pro match was on September 11, 1998 at Budokan Hall in a mid-card comedy match teaming with Baba and Kimura against Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and Masafuchi and Haruka Eigen. In the wake of the death of Baba, Tsuruta was pressured out of the company just 3 weeks later. He had his retirement ceremony on March 6, 1999 at Budokan Hall, and 4 days later took his family to start a new life in the United States. Misawa, whose career was made when Tsuruta put him over in the 1990 Budokan match, said when hearing the news on television that it has become more important than ever to keep the company and style of pro wrestling alive, because if the style is lost, people like Baba and Tsuruta's history would be lost. Jumbo Tsuruta. Career title history. Source: Wrestling Title Histories and Observer Records. All Japan Triple Crown. Became first champion unifying PWF, NWA International and United National titles, beating Stan Hansen April 18, 1989 Tokyo. Lost to Genichiro Tenryu June 6, 1989 Tokyo. Defeated Genichiro Tenryu October 11, 1989 Yokohama. Lost to Terry Gordy June 5, 1990 Chiba. Defeated Stan Hansen January 19, 1991 Matsumoto. Lost to Stan Hansen January 28, 1992 Tokyo. AWA World Heavyweight. Defeated Nick Bockwinkel February 22, 1984 Tokyo. Lost to Rick Martel May 13, 1984 St. Paul. Pacific Wrestling Federation Heavyweight. Defeated Stan Hansen April 18, 1989 to unify into Triple Crown. NWA International Heavyweight. Defeated Bruiser Brody August 30, 1983 Tokyo. Lost to Stan Hansen July 31, 1986 Tokyo. Defeated Stan Hansen October 21, 1986 Tokyo. Lost to Bruiser Brody March 27, 1988 Tokyo. Defeated Bruiser Brody April 19, 1988 Sendai. Defeated Stan Hansen to unify into Triple Crown April 18, 1989 Tokyo. United National Heavyweight. Defeated Jack Briscoe August 28, 1976 in tournament final to win vacant title. Lost to Billy Robinson March 5, 1977 Akita. Defeated Billy Robinson March 23, 1977 Miami. Lost to Dick Murdoch February 23, 1980 Kagoshima. Defeated Dick Murdoch March 5, 1980 Kurioso. Lost to Abdullah the Butcher October 13, 1980 Nagoya. Defeated Abdullah the Butcher January 22, 1981 Nagasaki. Lost to Harley Race August 1, 1982 Tokyo. Defeated Harley Race October 24, 1982 Kitami. Vacated title June 17, 1983. Defeated Stan Hansen April 18, 1989 Tokyo to unify into Triple Crown. All Japan Double World Tag Team with Yoshiaki Yatsu became first champions unifying PWF and NWA International Tag titles, beating Road Warriors June 10, 1988 Tokyo. Lost to Stan Hansen and Terry Gordy July 29, 1988 Takasaki. With Yoshiaki Yatsu defeated Stan Hansen and Terry Gordy July 31, 1988 Hakodate. Lost to Genichiro Tenryu and Ashura Hara August 29, 1988 Tokyo. Defeated Genichiro Tenryu and Ashura Hara August 30, 1988 Osaka. Vacated titles after losing non-title match to Stan Hansen and Terry Gordy November 30, 1988 Takasaki, with Yoshiaki Yatsu defeated Stan Hansen and Terry Gordy February 2, 1989 Kansas City. Lost to Stan Hansen and Genichiro Tenryu July 11, 1989 Sapporo, with Yoshiaki Yatsu defeated Stan Hansen and Genichiro Tenryu July 22, 1989 Ishikawa. Lost to Stan Hansen and Genichiro Tenryu October 20, 1989 Nagoya. With Great Kabuki defeated Terry Gordy and Steve Williams July 19, 1990 Tokyo. Titles vacated when Kabuki jumps to SWS promotion, with Akira Taue defeated Terry Gordy and Steve Williams March 4, 1992 Tokyo. Titles vacated December 1992 when Tsuruta contracts hepatitis B and ends his main event career. Pacific Wrestling Federation World Tag Team with Tiger Mask. Mitsuharu Misawa defeated Stan Hansen and Ted DiBiase July 3, 1987 Tokyo lost to Stan Hansen and Ted DiBiase July 11, 1987 Yonago with Yoshiaki Yatsu def Genichiro Tenryu and Ashura Hara June 4, 1988 Sapporo. NWA International Tag Team, with Giant Baba defeated Dory and Terry Funk February 5, 1975 San Antonio, lost to Kentaro Oki and Kim Duke October 28, 1976 Tokyo, with Giant Baba defeated Kentaro Oki and Kim Duke December 9, 1976 Tokyo, lost to Kentaro Oki and Kim Duke November 7, 1977 Seoul, South Korea, with Giant Baba defeated Kentaro Oki and Kim Duke May 11, 1978 Osaka, lost to Abdullah the Butcher and Ray Candy October 12, 1979 Asahikawa, with Giant Baba defeated Abdullah the Butcher and Ray Candy October 19, 1979 Koriyama, lost Stan Hansen and Ron Bass April 12, 1983 Matsuyama, with Giant Baba defeated Stan Hansen and Ron Bass April 17, 1983 Nagasaki, lost to Tiger Jeet Singh and Umanosuke Ueda July 26, 1983 Fukuoka, with Giant Baba defeated Tiger Jeet Singh and Umanosuke Ueda August 1, 1983 Tokyo, vacated titles when Baba was injured, with Genichiro Tenryu defeated Bruiser Brody and Jerry Blackwell September 3, 1984 Hiroshima, lost to Riki Choshu and Yoshiaki Yatsu February 5, 1986 Sapporo, with Genichiro Tenryu defeated Riki Choshu and Yoshiaki Yatsu February 7, 1987 Sapporo, lost to Road Warriors March 12, 1987 Tokyo, with Yoshiaki Yatsu defeated Road Warriors June 10, 1988 Tokyo to unify into All Japan double tag team titles. NWA World Tag Team, Michigan/Ohio version, with Giant Baba defeated John Bonello and Randy Scott June 28, 1980 Detroit promotion folded. Champion Carnival Tournament Champion. May 1, 1980, defeated Dick Slater in finals. April 16, 1991, defeated Stan Hansen in finals. Other years 1974 3RD lost in semifinals to Tim Woods, 1975, lost in quarterfinals to Gene Kiniski, 1976 third behind Baba and Abdullah, 1977, second to Baba, 1978, third behind Baba and Abdullah, 1979, second to Abdullah, 1981, third behind Baba and Brody, 1982, second to Baba, 1992, second to Misawa in A Block Real World Tag League Tournament Champion. December 15, 1978, with Giant Baba drew Dory and Terry Funk in finals, won tournament by points. December 11, 1980, with Giant Baba defeated Dory and Terry Funk. December 12, 1984, with Genichiro Tenryu defeated Bruiser Brody and Stan Hansen. December 12, 1986, with Genichiro Tenryu defeated Stan Hansen and Ted DiBiase. December 11, 1987, with Yoshiaki Yatsu defeated Bruiser Brody and Jimmy Snuka. Other years 1977, with Baba's second place to Funk's 1979, with Baba's second place to Funk's 1981, with Baba's second place to Brody and Jimmy Snuka, 1982, with Baba's second place to Funk's 1983, with Tenryu's second place to Brody and Hansen, 1985, with Tenryu's second place to Hansen and Ted DiBiase, 1988, with Yatsu's second place to Hansen and Terry Gordy, 1989, with Yatsu's second place to Hansen and Tenryu, 1990 with Taue third place behind Gordy and Steve Williams and Hansen and Danny Spivey, 1991, with Yatsu's second place to Gordy and Williams Wrestling Observer Awards. Wrestler of the Year, 1991. Feud of the Year, 1990, versus Mitsuharu Misawa, 1991, Tag Team Feud versus Misawa Hall of Fame, Original Class of 1996 Japanese Sports Media Awards. Wrestler of the Year, 1981, 1983, 1984, 1989, 1991. Match of the Year, March 28, 1976, versus Rusher Kimura August 25, 1977, versus Mil Mascaras, January 20, 1978, versus Harley Race, August 26, 1979, tag match with Tatsumi Fujinami and Mil Mascaras versus Masa Saito and Tiger Taguchi and Akihisa Takachio, December 11, 1980, with Giant Baba versus Dory and Terry Funk, November 4, 1985, versus Riki Choshu, August 31, 1987, versus Genichiro Tenryu, June 5, 1989, versus Genichiro Tenryu Best Technical Wrestler, 1974, 1986, 1988. Tag Team of the Year 1978, with Giant Baba, 1980 with Baba, 1982 with Baba, 1983 with Genichiro Tenryu 1985, with Tenryu 1989, with Yoshiaki Yatsu Amateur Sports Credentials. 1971 Japanese Collegiate, Freestyle and Greco-Roman Heavyweight Champion. 1972 Japanese Collegiate, Freestyle and Greco-Roman Heavyweight Champion. 1972 Olympic Games in Munich, Germany, 7th place in Super Heavyweight Division in Greco-Roman Wrestling. Despite putting on a strong pay-per-view, ECW's long-term future doesn't look as good as the show came across due to its inability to keep talent for a wide variety of reasons. Besides the much-publicized loss of Mike Alfonso, Mike Awesome, while holding its title, Lance Evers, Lance Storm, who until a few weeks back was part of the company's only marquee tag team, and actually headlined the Hardcore Heaven pay-per-view, said his goodbyes after the show and is also headed to World Championship Wrestling, where he reached an agreement on a 3-year deal and is expected to start in a few weeks. In addition, Scott Levy, Raven, who was at the show but not used, is nearly a definite to be gone after August when his contract expires if not sooner, and the future of Francisco Pantoja Islas Super Crazy appears questionable as he also missed the pay-per-view. The only name addition to the roster during this same period, which is not a definite but looks to be a probable, is Masato Tanaka, who has been a semi-regular for the past several years but may end up working as an ECW regular. From a match quality standpoint, the May 14th Hardcore Heaven, held before a sellout crowd of 3,400 paying $107,000, and another $24,000 in merchandise sales, at the Rave in Milwaukee, delivered. Every match ranged from solid to very good. But the show was clearly being booked on the fly, and it showed. Even as late as the day of the show, the main event was being changed around. The original main event was a 3-way with new champ Justin Credible, his soon-to-be-departed tag partner, Storm, and the former champ who held the belt for literally a few minutes, Tommy Dreamer. At one point during the day there were plans of turning the 3-way into a 4-way, with Raven, as a way to eliminate Dreamer to leave Storm versus Credible as the ending with Credible winning clean, which was the idea they wanted to get to. Technically the plan going in was for Storm and Credible to work together as a tag team to attack Dreamer, and take him out with a stuffed pile driver. Raven was to hit the ring for a hot comeback, but eventually also be double-teamed and stuffed pile driven. Credible would pin Dreamer while Storm would pin Raven, and they would tease that they were still together as a team. But then Storm would attack Credible and the match would go on as a singles match. When Raven was pulled from the show, they changed the scenario because they didn't want emphasis on Dreamer being pinned. With Raven being pinned at the same time, the emphasis on the Dreamer pin would be diluted, since he has to headline the next pay-per-view against Credible, so they switched to where Dreamer never got into the match in the first place. This resulted in a hastily done and somewhat lame angle to get Dreamer out, which may have resulted in killing the heat for a solid but not great final match. The miscues from a production standpoint started early. When the show started, there was a long period of dead air, with the cameras showing a crowd shot and no commentary. While this was going on, they missed the complete angle where Dreamer walked into the building staggered, with a story behind it that Credible had attacked him before the show and a last-minute change, to tease a storyline angle that he wouldn't be ready for the main event. There were cues missed and Dreamer staggering and never appeared on the screen. Later in the show, Joey Styles described what happened that wasn't shown, but by this time Styles said that against good judgment, Dreamer vowed he would be in the main event. Then when the main event started, Credible did an interview saying that if anyone except Storm came through the curtain that he would vacate the title right there and throw it in the garbage can. Dreamer came out in security and Paul Heyman stopped him, with Heyman begging Dreamer to do the right thing because the company couldn't afford the public relations nightmare of the title being trashed again, so Dreamer, grudgingly, and teasing possible dissension with Heyman, walked off. Whether his walking off was the reason the main event drew such disappointing heat isn't clear, but it's probably at least part of the case given the "We Want Dreamer" chants and the feeling that the finish would be caused in some form by Dreamer coming back. After the requisite catfight spot there was no heat for the near falls, some of which were very good, and the finish, where Credible won clean with his spinning tombstone, ended with a flat crowd response, which didn't pick up until Dreamer made his run-in. The closing scene was of Dreamer badmouthing Credible, who he had laid out, with them teasing that match as the main event for the July 16th Heat Wave pay-per-view show that Heyman's original plan was to headline with a Credible vs. Storm singles match. While never publicly advertised, as only the top 3 matches were ever listed, and there was one interview where New Jack talked about a match with Angel, a planned match to determine the vacant tag titles with Super Crazy and Yoshihiro Tao teaming together for the first time against Gedo and Jado, didn't take place. With Crazy's problems due to never getting correct working papers despite being in ECW for nearly a year and a half, and being caught at the Houston airport flying in last week, they were unable to clear up the problems in time for this show. There has been talk among the wrestlers that Crazy may not be allowed back in the country for several years, although Paul Heyman stated at first he'd be back for this show, and others in the company still feel it'll be worked out in a few weeks. Without that match, Heyman decided against booking Gedo and Jado. He also changed the planned Masato Tanaka vs Kentaro Kanemura match to Tanaka vs Balls Mahoney, which was a better match on every level, using Kanemura for a last-second angle and a run-in. But the scariest moment was averted. During the second match on the show, the lights went out, and they wrestled with only a spotlight. Luckily, about a minute after the match ended, things were taken care of because that could have destroyed the entire show. There was a precedent for something like this back in 1995 when UFC did a pay-per-view event in Buffalo, New York at the Old War Memorial, and the lights went out, causing a lengthy delay in the show. They stalled the show instead of presenting matches with poor lighting, and it resulted in the card lasting more than 3 hours, which meant many systems cut away while the main event of the show was in progress, which as you can imagine is a PR disaster. The show opened with Styles and Joel Gertner doing the open. They got rid of Gertner when Kanemura came to the broadcast position and put him out with a sleeper, allowing Cyrus Don Callis to take over. 1. Masato Tanaka pinned Balls Mahoney John Reschner in 9:14. Tanaka did some nice swinging DDTs. They did the dueling chair shot spot where Mahoney delivers 3 chairs to the head before putting Tanaka down. It was the same spot used in every Tanaka match with Mahoney when he first came in, and they tore the house down with the spot. Tanaka took some major damage from them, and the chair shots were toned down, but still seemed to work. Mahoney also superkicked a chair to Tanaka's face. Tanaka delivered a DDT on the chairs. Tanaka kicked out of Mahoney's Nutcracker Suite and Mahoney kicked out of Tanaka's Diamond Dust. Mahoney delivered a Nutcracker Suite on a chair for a near fall. Fans gave the two a standing ovation at this point. Tanaka hit the Roaring Elbow for a near fall before getting the pin after a chair to the head coming off the top rope and another Roaring Elbow, and they hugged afterwards. This was not nearly as good as the matches these two had when Tanaka first came to ECW. 3 stars. 2. Little Guido James Maritato won a 3-way over Simon Diamond, Pat Kenny, and Mikey Whipwreck, Don Watson, in 7:08. It'll shock everyone, seeing how they dressed Prodijet, Angel Orsini, up to look like a man that 5 years ago she was attractive. Fast-paced action. The lights going out killed the match. They did a spot where Diamond did a pescado but was caught in midair by a taped-up Sal E. Graziano, and then Whipwreck dove over the top, knocking everyone over. Whipwreck pinned Diamond with the whippersnapper in 5:34. Whipwreck did what started as a double-arm suplex, putting Guido on his shoulder like an old Canadian backbreaker and dropped him into almost a piledriver, which really popped the crowd. Finish saw Guido get on Graziano's shoulders for a high elbow drop which missed badly. Whipwreck then threw fire at Graziano, which also missed badly. When he turned around, Guido caught him with a tomahawk, called him Maritato, for the pin. 2 stars. 3. Kid Cash, David Cash, pinned C.W. Anderson Chris Wright, in 6 minutes. The match started with Lou E. dangerously saying that Elektra is all natural and was challenging any woman in the back. Jazz came out and took out Anderson, Bill Wiles and dangerously before stripping Elektra down too, first a Mike Awesome t-shirt for easy cheap heat, and then took the t-shirt off to reveal about as little as you could get away with on a wrestling pay-per-view. There was so little fabric in what she was wearing that they must have glued it on to avoid her oversized implants from falling out. The match started and it was hot as these two work well together. Cash did a plancha over the post into the crowd. He came off the apron with a Hurricane Rana on Wiles. Anderson blocked a Hurricane Rana into a power bomb. They did a great spot where Cash went for a moonsault block, but Anderson turned it into a vertical suplex. Cash ended up scoring the pin after a Frankensteiner off the top rope. 3 stars. 4. Chris Chetti and Nova, Mike Bucci won a 3-way over Angel Medina, and Tony DeVito and Danny During, Daniel Morrison, and Roadkill Mike DiPaolo in 6:35. This was a good match, but it really made ECW seem like it had no depth when it was brought up that these teams were the top contenders for the tag team titles. Nova did a lot of good moves, including a plancha onto During and DeVito and a swanton on DeVito. The Baldy's double choke slammed Roadkill onto 2 chairs. Vic Grimes interfered. During gave him a leg drop off the top. But when he got up, Angel hit him with a guitar for the pin in 4:16. Grimes then took a hip toss off the ramp to the floor. Roadkill then splashed Grimes off the top through a table. Nova did some more innovative moves and the finish saw Nova and Chetty use the double team tidal wave off the top rope to pin DeVito. 2.25 stars. 5. New Jack, Jerome Young, pinned Angel in 6:50. After the match, the Baldies jumped Nova and Chetty until New Jack made the save. It was the same New Jack weapon stuff it always is, using a stapler on DeVito and a fork on him until he juiced. Jack jumped off what appeared to be about a 14-foot-high balcony through a table on DeVito. He seemed to be hurting, but was helped to the ring where he hit Angel with a guitar as Angel was being held by Chetty and Nova, and then pinned him. It was then announced that New Jack is now king of the streets again. 1 star. 6. Yoshihiro Tao pinned Steve Corino in 10:25. Tao looked tremendous in this match. He used stuff kicks, a brainbuster on the floor, and Corino juiced heavy to where his hair turned red. The idea is to get Corino over as being tough by bleeding all the time. Tao kicked a chair into Corino's face twice and dropkicked a table into him. Jack Victory interfered. They went for near falls before Tao used the double foot stomp through a table for the pin. After the match, Kanemura ran in and attacked Tao along with Victory and Corino. This led to Dusty Rhodes coming out to make the save until Rhino cut off Rhodes. This led to the lengthy Sandman ring entrance. Exactly what happened to Tao and Rhodes is unknown as Sandman took his time getting to the ring. I guess they simply got up, or disappeared through a trapdoor due to Ultimate Warrior's mysterious powers or something. 3.25 stars. 7. Rhino Terry Garrin pinned Sandman James Fullington in 6:23 to retain the ECW TV title. This match was much better than it had any right to be. Sandman was cut up before the match started from smashing the beers on his forehead. He came off the apron with a leg drop with Rhino draped over the guardrail. Rhino sprinted down the ramp, jumped off a chair and crashed through a table when Sandman moved. They broke a second table in there. Laurie Fullington came out and was attacked by Corino and Victory. Rhino got Laurie Fullington and jumped off the apron with a piledriver through a table. Sandman made the hot comeback, clocking everyone with the cane until Rhino picked up Laurie's limp body and speared her into Sandman through a table. 3 stars. 8. Jerry Lynn pinned Rob Van Dam, Robert Sotkowski, in 1950. This was the best match on the show, but not even close to the level of many of their previous matches. With both being injured, some of the high-risk moves were cut down on, but the crowd heat overall for the match was disappointing. Van Dam got the biggest pop coming out for his return and they worked tremendously together, maybe better inside the ring than even in the past. Lynn did a flip dive over the top. Van Dam did a twisting leg drop off the apron with a chair with Lynn draped over the guardrail. Van Dam missed a moonsault block off the guardrail and Lynn did a float over DDT. The crowd was cold for most of this. Bill Alfonso brought in a chair. Van Dam ended up with a bloody nose and Lynn hit him with the chair. Lynn countered an attempt at the Van Daminator. Van Dam with a somersault with the chair onto Lynn. Lynn did a power bomb off the ropes onto the chair, which didn't look right. Lynn did a superplex off the top. Lynn used a bulldog off the apron through a table, which wound up cutting Lynn's back open slightly. Lynn did a rolling body block off the apron onto Scott Anton, whose turn seemed really obvious from the way he was dressed for some reason. Van Dam used the Van Daminator off the ropes and a frog splash onto the chair, but Lynn kicked in. It didn't get nearly the pop you'd think. Corino and Victory did a run-in and the crowd groaned. Lynn cleaned house, saving Van Dam from the interference. Rhino then speared Lynn and powerbombed Van Dam. Van Dam came back with a rider kick off the top rope onto Rhino and a Van Daminator onto Cyrus. All the run-ins took the match down. Lynn did a Van Daminator on Alfonso, but Van Dam with a Van Daminator on Lynn. Van Dam went to the top rope, and suddenly Anton turned on his best friend RVD, shoving him off the top, and he had a really bad landing. Almost did the splits, coming off the ramp. I guess this stuff has become so predictable because it's overdone in other companies that whenever you see it, it just looks like monkey see monkey do pro wrestling booking, even if the idea was come up with months ago. In the ring, Lynn used his cradle piledriver, but Van Dam kicked out the first time. He did it again. This time it was supposed to be on a chair. Actually, he missed the chair noticeably, and got the pin. 3.5 stars. 8. Just incredible, Peter Polacco retained the ECW title, pinning Lance Storm, Lance Evers at 12:29. It opened with Credible threatening to throw the belt in the garbage can and vacating it if anyone other than Storm came into the ring. Dreamer came out, but security and Heyman kept him from entering the ring. This came off really lame. Storm came out and got so high on a drop kick early that he cleared Credible's head, causing negative chants. Storm, who never blades, Ian said on TSN's Off the Record that he would never do it, but came up with the idea himself to do so to get Credible over. Did it right away. They had a nice series starting with Storm reversing Credible's tombstone into position for one of his own, but Credible reversing that into a reverse DDT position, but Storm blocking that and ending up with a Northern Lights suplex. Storm hip-tossed Credible over the top rope through a table that had been set up. Storm also did a nice roll-through into a half-crab for a T submission until Francine broke it, hitting Storm with her shoe. Of course, Dawn Marie was in for the catfight spot, which ended when Credible gave the spinning tombstone to Dawn Marie. After that, the crowd died. Storm got a near fall with a pile driver, and reversed a tombstone for another near fall. They went to one near fall after another with no pop until finally Credible delivered his spinning tombstone, grabbing Storm off the ropes for the clean pin. You have to give Storm a lot of credit. While 95% of the people in the business would have done the job in the same situation, he went out of his way to put the champion and the belt over without asking for a ref bump, a run-in, or any other gimmick that would have saved face for him. After the match, Dreamer came out to a big pop and caned Credible and teased doing the same to Francine. She tried to pacify Dreamer by giving him the belt and rubbing up against him. So of course he gave her a Spicoli driver and put the belt on Credible and basically threatened the out Credible as the final scene on the show. 2.5 stars. The debut of Pride on American pay-per-view was generally well received by the few who actually had access to the show and purchased it. The tape of the May 1st Tokyo Dome show, which was the toughest tournament in the history of mixed martial arts and in many ways the best overall show in history, what will in the very near future be referred to as the legendary Kazushi Sakuraba vs. Hoist Gracie 90 minutes match and the return of Ken Shamrock, made it the most important historical NHB show since the early days of the genre. It aired only on the Dish Network on May 13th and airs May 20th on Viewer Choice Canada. The 6-hour-plus show was edited down to 3 hours, which was probably best all concerned for the American audience, but it also left you feeling like you were watching a tape instead of the excitement of a live event with all the edit points. Before the Gracie Sakuraba match started, there was a voiceover stating that because this historic match lasted 90 minutes, it is edited but that none of the footage important to the outcome were taken out, which gave away not the result, but that it was a long fight ahead of time. I'm very skeptical of the chances of success of any pay-per-view promotion as far as actually being a financial success, without strong television to hype the product, or strong media as pro boxing gets. The show featured the sternest warning about violence I've ever seen on a sports event, basically a warning that due to the violent nature of the show, that it was inappropriate for children under 17, even though the show is far tamer when it comes to violent portrayals than any modern pro wrestling event. Despite the huge crowd at the Tokyo Dome, 38,400, at no point did the announcers get over how huge an event it was or talk about the crowd. The ticket prices, far larger than any crowd for a pro wrestling pay-per-view in a few years. Announcers Stephen Quadros, Boss Rutan and Maurice Smith were very good when it came to strategy, but poor when it came to conveying excitement or storyline interest or the basics of hype that are needed for the general public to get into it. They put over the quality of the matches, but never got excited as the matches went on. The camera work was very strong, so the impact of the blows, which often gets lost in shows like this, were evident for everyone to see. With 4 pro wrestlers in the show, Sakuraba, referred to throughout the show as Mr. Sakuraba as a throwback to 1970s American pro wrestling, when most Japanese wrestlers' first name was Mr. Kazuyuki Fujita, Alexander Otsuka and Shamrock, not to mention the well-received appearances on camera by Antonio Inoki. There was talk about how the pro wrestling in Japan was very different from the US, although Smith did say the pro wrestling in Japan also wasn't real fighting, but that Sakuraba, a pro wrestler, had all the skills and the heart. At one point in a discussion about eventual champion Mark Coleman, it was stated that he had never tapped out before in a fight. The Nobuhiko Takada fight, a work match where Takada won via tap out to a heel hook, naturally came up, and while someone who knew what they were talking about could read between the lines and realize they were saying, without using those words, that it was a worked fight or fixed fight or pro wrestling match, I believe the term used was an audience fight. They didn't say it and no casual viewer would have a clue what that meant. It's unfair in portrayal of this as a sport to use what was really a pro wrestling match as a credential for someone's fight history. They were in a difficult position announcing for Pride, which has had many worked matches in its past. They also talked much about previous matches on Pride shows, in particular on the January 30th tournament, which most of the viewing audience wouldn't know about. It would have been good to show clips from that show, but considering they already had to edit so much out to begin with, not airing them was a necessary evil. Gracie Sakuraba was edited down to 36 minutes. If better off for an American audience. It removed much of the drama of actually seeing a fight go 90 minutes, but in its edited form removed many of the slow spots, and there was plenty of drama seeing a real action-packed match go that long. The majority pegged it as the best match on the show, and it will probably be remembered as the best of the year, and possibly even the decade, just because it was an historical result and that it went so long, because I doubt we'll be seeing too many no time limit fights, so it'll be a long time before another 90-minute match. The crowd pop for the finish and the drama for older fans of seeing Gracie decisively beaten and his 87-year-old father Elio shaking Sakuraba's hand. The match held up even being edited. A correction on the weights. The internet reports were incorrect. Gracie actually weighed in at 177.5 pounds and Sakuraba at 181.1. I guess people were anxious to have Gracie lose to someone who was lighter than him, as a way to avoid what would be expected to be an excuse for the loss, which actually was never made. Igor Vachenchin, 224.8, Russia versus Gary Goodridge, 237.2, Canada, was a really good opening match. This match was heavily edited, unfortunately, because it was a great fight, with the 10:44 being edited down to 5 minutes. Goodridge got tired first after both men traded hard punches. Goodridge actually rocked Vachenchin just before Vachenchin came back and put Goodridge away with a flurry. Both men also came in lighter than usual, as Vachenchin usually fights at 235 to 240 and Goodridge has fought as heavy as 260 in the past. Gracie vs. Sakuraba came off as entertaining. The announcers did a good job strategically, since in the first round, with Gracie throwing lots of punches, they noted he won the round, but also noted it appeared Sakuraba's strategy was to get Gracie to tire first, which turned out to be prophetic. Gracie threw a lot of punches, but they weren't strong punches that did serious damage. By fight's end, Gracie was tired and his face was battered. Coleman 228.8, United States, versus Akira Shoji, 203.1, Japan, saw Coleman look impressive with his newfound boxing skill to go along with being a world-class wrestler. Shoji didn't drop weight for the tournament, but Coleman has fought as heavy at 255 in his original UFC days, so you can see he trimmed way down for stamina. Coleman has always had a heavy punch, but seemed to posse's good skill. Coleman was able to take Shoji down and through good combination of rib and head punches. Coleman cut Shoji's right eye with a punch and his ribs were terribly discolored and his mouth was bloodied up. He also wound up with an egg under his right eye. Toward the end of the 15 minutes round, Shoji shocked Coleman with a takedown and pounded on him momentarily until Coleman escaped. But it was a one-sided fight and the decision was obvious, but a good fight nonetheless. Fujita, 241.1, Japan, versus Mark Kerr, 236.7, United States, was an exciting fight, as the two wrestlers did a lot of striking. Kerr took Fujita down and pounded on him with punches and knees. Fujita got some punches in and Kerr got a good knee in that bloodied up Fujita's nose. Fujita came back with Kerr tiring, scoring a takedown and pounded on Kerr for a long time, including hard knees to the body, which apparently did damage to his own knee and resulted in him being unable to fight a second time, and scored another takedown later to win an easy decision. Fujita is announced at 275 as a pro wrestler with New Japan, although his legit weight probably is closer to 255. Kerr trimmed down from 255 in his UFC days. The non-tournament match with Guy Mesger, 203.9, United States, versus Masaki Sadake, 227.7, Japan, was heavily edited. Sadake actually did well, as he was slightly better on stand-up and threw a lot of good kicks. Mesger was competitive and threw good kicks. First round was even overall, none of which aired on the pay-per-view. They picked it up in a second round with Mesger on top after taking Sadake down and controlling him, throwing punches, getting him out, and giving him body shots until Sadake's ribs were discolored. They edited the 20 minutes match down to about 5 minutes. Sakuraba was definitely winning the decision over Vachenchin until the 11:30 mark, when Vachenchin escaped, got behind Sakuraba and threw what would be considered in pro wrestling as a poor German suplex. Vachenchin's face, even though he fought 10 minutes as opposed to 90 minutes, was really marked up going in. But it was still amazing after going 90 that Sakuraba even came out, let alone was winning against a man 45 pounds heavier for most of the fight. Sakuraba nearly armbarred him early. Sakuraba scored a few takedowns before he got tired. Sakuraba appeared to hit the wall because at about the 12 minutes mark, he couldn't do anything and took a terrible pounding, including getting a cut over his right eye. The decision at the end of the round was a draw, but Sakuraba's corner then threw in the towel for him. Coleman vs. Fujita basically never happened. Fujita came out with his knee all taped up. The bell rang and he shot for a takedown. And immediately Brian Johnston threw in the towel and Fujita sold like his knee was killing him. With Vovchanchyn being in a stand-up war with Goodridge and a very competitive struggle with Sakuraba, he had fought 25 hard minutes. Coleman went into the finals with one match with Shoji, which he was totally dominant in. So he had a big advantage getting what amounted to a bye in the finals. Bottom line is that no matter what, a tournament format favors the man who is the luckiest on that given night. If these 8 were put in another tournament in 4 months and all came in the same condition they were on this night, Coleman would probably win again because he was the strongest and had good enough stand-up. But Vovchanchyn had a disadvantage in the finals. The Battle of Pro Wrestlers with Shamrock, 213.8 versus Otsuka, 193.2, so Otsuka didn't go up to 225 as he claimed he would be training in the United States, up from 188 in January. Shamrock was 227 the last time he fought in late 1996 in the Ultimate against Johnston. Started with 3 minutes of stand-up. Shamrock was good with leg kicks, but his punches didn't zing like a boxer's. Shamrock seemed content to fight standing up, even though his greatest strength in the past was taking guys down and overpowering them. He was certainly doing better, getting in some punches and more low kicks, before Otsuka caught him with a solid punch to the face. Shamrock immediately took him down and tried a few submissions, but didn't get them. Shamrock had Otsuka under control on the ground for several minutes, but Otsuka was able to counter attempts at an armbar and entangled arm lock. Otsuka escaped and they had another stand-up exchange, and Shamrock was getting the better of it, with Otsuka getting a bloody nose, and was pounded on even more until hitting a flurry of punches that put Otsuka out. At no point in the fight was Shamrock ever in trouble, but the real question as to his comeback is how he reacts in a fight against someone who can give him legitimate trouble. Coleman vs. Vovchanchyn saw Coleman fight his fight. He took Vovchanchyn down and bruised up his ribs and threw punches to the face. Vovchanchyn threw some stuff from the bottom. Coleman went for an entangled arm lock, and while he has the strength, didn't have the technique to make it work. He continued throwing body shots in the first round. Coleman ended up with a cut on his eye. The first 20 minutes were all Coleman holding him down and throwing punches. Coleman took Vovchanchyn down to start the second round. He went for a neck crank. He finally got a side mount and started throwing knee after knee to his head. The last few shots with the left knee to Vovchanchyn's forehead were brutal, and Vovchanchyn, for only the second time in his long career, actually tapped out. Marcus Bagwell was arrested late May 9th after the show in Springfield, Illinois for possible charges of battery, and as a result a few days later was suspended for 30 days by Brad Siegel. At 10:15 p.m. Daryl Miller, a 35-year-old member of the WCW ring crew, was carrying carpet to the back, and Bagwell, Larry Fall Luger, and Elizabeth Hewlett were blocking the door he was going through. The crew member asked them to move so he could get what he was carrying through the exit door. Bagwell told him he was conducting business. Words were exchanged. Allegedly, Bagwell hit the crew member. The newspaper reported it was with a closed fist, but others close to the situation say it was an open hand. Miller suffered swelling to his neck but required no medical treatment. Bagwell posted $100 bail and was released. A follow-up story on May 11th made the top of the front page of the Springfield Journal-Register. It said the decision on whether to charge Bagwell rests with the state's attorney's office. "We still want to talk to the victim," said First Assistant State's Attorney John Bells. "There are certain witnesses who need to be talked to, and the WCW is a traveling organization." 3 other members of the ring crew were also right there at the exit. Miller claimed in his report to the police when he asked Bagwell to move so he could get through, Bagwell replied with an expletive. A second worker who also needed to get equipment through the door came by and asked Bagwell to move, and he replied with the same expletive. Miller claimed he said, "I wasn't talking to you," to Bagwell when he punched him on the side of the neck. Police reports said there was an indentation of a fist visible on the side of his neck when he filed the report, and employees of WCW took photos of the injury. Bagwell's version to police was that when Miller asked him to move, he thought he did so rudely. After words were exchanged, Bagwell said he was upset with Miller and punched him upside the neck because Bagwell said Miller pissed him off, so he hit him. Police talked with Fole and Hewlett, who both claimed that neither saw or heard anything because a Goldberg monster truck was crushing a Buick at the same time. Based on the contract Bagwell just signed, $275,000 base salary, $1,300 per match bonus and $4,000 per pay-per-view appearance, A 30-day suspension would cost him in the neighborhood of $45,000. WCW's world title may change hands once or twice per week, and Ric Flair may be 51 years old, but the combination of both led WCW to a more competitive Monday night than usual. Raw finished with a 6.16 rating, 5.98 first hour, 6.32 seconds hour, and a 9.3 share. Nitro ended up with a 3.11 rating, 3.37 first hour, 2.89 seconds hour, and a 4.7 share. The head-to-head was 5.84 for Raw and 2.89 for Nitro, so it was still a 2-to-1 margin. The total head-to-head pro wrestling audience was 10.1 million viewers. Raw picked up 34% of the Nitro audience when the show went off the air, and 80% of the total wrestling audience watched the Benoit vs. Rock match. The Rock vs. Benoit main event drew a 7.00 rating. The Jarrett vs. Flair title change drew a 3.29 rating. The return of Michaels drew a very disappointing 5.53 rating against a 3.07 for the Flair family angle with Russo and the beginning of Medusa vs. Elizabeth. The experiment of opening the show with the Sting vs. Vampiro cage match drew a 2.83, which is above the previous 2 weeks' opens of 2.5 and 2.3, but below the 3.2 open on April 24th. The other head-to-head quarters saw Raw at 5.75, Dudley's vs. Snow and Blackman, to 2.82, Awesome Nash angle, Steiner's Abbott angle, Raw at 5.91, Angle vs. Rikishi, Godfather vs. Crash Holly, to 2.90, Awesome vs. Nash, Bischoff Page angle, Raw at 6.44, Vince Stephanie, Triple H and Rock interview, to 2.48, Hogan vs. Horace vs. Kidman, Raw at 5.55, Jericho vs. Bob Holly, to 3.29, Flair vs. Jarrett. For those keeping track, this was the 76th consecutive week that Raw has beaten Nitro, so they are 7 weeks shy of the WCW 83 show record. SmackDown on May 11th drew a 4.98 rating and 8.1 share. The show opened at 3.92 and grew steadily until a 5.75 for the Too Cool and Rikishi vs. DX main event. Thunder on May 10th drew a 2.49 rating and 3.9 share. From a realistic standpoint, it was the lowest rated show since the new regime took over. Some will point out the May 3rd show drew less, but that was more due to the different time slot, as that show would have done 2.7 to 2.9 in the regular slot, but it's still a significant improvement over the prior regime. The Horace vs. Filthy Animals segment, where Bischoff kept changing the rules, was the peak at 2.87. The Sting vs. Awesome main event dropped all the way to 2.28, so they still had a big drop over the last 30 minutes with no wrestling opposition after generally building most of the way up until the Horace segment. Weekend numbers for May 13. TH14 saw Livewire at 1.5, Superstars at 1.4 and Heat at 2.88. WCW Saturday Night was back to its record low levels with a 1.3. ECW on May 12th drew an 0.92 rating and 1.7 share. Roller Jam did the highest rating of the year with an 0.81, hyping a match race where the object was to remove all the clothes from the women, actually very tame, as they just stripped them to short shorts and bikini tops. The ECW peak rating for Storm vs. Lynn, the audience dropped very slightly to the point of being insignificant, for Rhino vs. Tao was 0.97, which wasn't all that much better than the Roller Jam high quarter at 0.95, which would blow away any of its quarter hours this season. The Galavision 3-hour block on May 9th drew a 1.6 Hispanic rating. Japanese television rundown. April 19th, All Japan. 1. Kenta Kobashi pinned Mitsuharu Misawa in 26:08 in the Champion Carnival semifinal. Unfortunately, this match was heavily edited for TV. Given what else was on this show, I have no clue as to why. It appeared to be the best match so far this year, which makes it 3 or 4 years in a row for these guys. Misawa in particular must have been feeling good, because he did more than he's done in years as far as moves, to go along with his usual perfect timing, selling and ring psychology. Misawa did his elbow suicida and even a rolling pescado over the top. Kobashi dropped Misawa on his head with a half Nelson German suplex twice and an orange crush bomb for another near fall. He also gave him a power bomb into a turnbuckle. Misawa escaped the burning hammer, torture rack into a Death Valley bomb. Kobashi ended up getting the pin with a Cobra Clutch German suplex, a rabbit lariat followed by a conventional lariat. 2. Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Taue beat Steve Williams and Johnny Smith in 16:01. Williams and Taue had major problems working with each other. Williams needs to be carried and Taue is totally washed up. One exchange was so bad looking that fans laughed. Fortunately, Kawada and Smith more than made up for it with Kawada pinning Smith at the finish. 2.5. 3. Johnny Ace and Mike Barton beat Jun Akiyama and Manukia Mossman in 12:30. Mossman was the star of this match and carried it to a good match. That's saying something since he was in there with Ace, who has been in Japan for a long time so he knows what to do, but still a bad worker, and Barton who hasn't been in Japan nearly as long and isn't as good a worker as Ace. But Mossman got a good match out of him as well. He got to deliver his Hawaiian Crusher, which is a fireman's carry turned into a stunner. Barton ended up pinning Mossman after a power bomb. 3 stars. April 22, New Japan. The show opened with clips of a Masakazu Fukuda, who had passed away earlier in the week, versus Shinjiro Otani match which looked awesome. They had sad music playing, and showed photos and clips of Fukuda, including showing funeral footage. Except for one thing, this was so much more classy than anything any promotion has ever done for a wrestler death in this country, and God knows we've had a lot more chances to get it right. It was really sad to see Fukuda's fiancée delivering a eulogy because it put a human touch on it. The New Japan wrestlers were all there very human-like instead of coming trying to look like stars at an event to be seen. The negative was that they had Yuji Nagata, Manabu Nakanishi and Yutaka Yoshi doing the G-Eggs team that Fukuda was to be a part of doing interviews, kind of doing the idea that they'll use Fukuda's spirit to make them the dominant team in New Japan, or something along those lines. I didn't like using Fukuda's death as part of a pro wrestling interview and damper what up to that point had been a model of class. 1. Hiroyoshi Tenzan pinned Yoshi in 12:34. This was their match from the April 7th Tokyo Dome. Yoshi comes across like a 70s heel, because he's got bleached blonde hair, looks to be about 280 with massive legs, a decent-sized gut and arms that don't look like a lifter. He looks like one of those 70s college heavyweight wrestlers or linemen who lifted some, ate a lot more, but wasn't a steroid freak. This was his first match back after a lengthy European and Canadian stay. He did a power slam off the top rope and a choke into a German suplex. They did lots of headbutts. Tenzan got the pin after a forearm drop off the top rope. 1.5, 2. Nakanishi pinned Scott Norton in 11:07. Horrible. It was very physical in that they pounded on each other hard standing. Other than pounding, they did nothing. Norton must have torn his right bicep again or had some sort of a serious injury because he has an Orndorff small arm, which is amazing since he's lived his life with those monstrous arms. He's never been good, but he looked like a guy who is totally through. Finish saw Nakanishi get Norton up in the rack for a long time, then drop him and pin him. Even though Nakanishi pinning Norton should get a reaction, the match was so bad and finish so weak that nobody cared. -1.5. Next up was clips from the April 21st retirement ceremony for Kunyaki Kobayashi. This was really sad. They showed clips of him from the glory days with Satoru Sayama, which looked so much more major league, even though it was 17 years ago, than anything in today's pro wrestling except WWF clips. They showed a few clips from his final match against Jushin Liger. He did his trademark spots and everything he did got a pop. But he did look like it was time to retire. Crowd really wanted to see him win, but Liger pinned him after a brainbuster. I guess there's something noble about putting somebody over clean in your last match since you have no business reason to win, only to give back. Still, the crowd was left flat. They showed clips of the ceremony itself, with a big reaction when Sayama showed up. But even with Sayama and Kobayashi both crying while the home viewers saw clips of them when they were kings, as performers, they couldn't top Kobayashi's 2 daughters. They were crying with their father, as his career ended. Anyone who dismisses pro wrestling for being fake only needs to see that moment. 3. Hiro Saito and Tatsutoshi Goto and Michiyoshi Ohara won February 3rd falls from Otani and Koji Kanemoto and Tatsuhiro Takaiwa in 1826. Not sure what the purpose of this match was, but it was an excellent bout. First fall was mainly Kanemoto versus Goto. If there was any doubt Kanemoto was one of the great workers of our time, it was answered here. Goto was just about the worst wrestler in the promotion and the fall was excellent, with Kanemoto getting near fall after near fall before Goto killed him with a back suplex. Second fall wasn't quite as good, but there was an incredibly timed spot where Kanemoto delivered a dropkick on Ohara hitting exactly as Otani hit him in the back with a springboard dropkick. After seeing heavyweights always beat junior heavyweights, it led to a super pop when Takaiwa pinned Saito after a Death Valley driver. The finish of the fall was good. Third fall was the best, largely due to Ohara and Otani, who worked great together. Ohara finally scored the pin after numerous near falls, using a choke slam. 4 stars. Mexico, Nicho El Millonario beat Rey Mysterio Sr., as expected, in their hair versus hair match on May 12th in Tijuana in what was reported as a wild brawl before a sellout of 6,000 fans. They added seats from the usual capacity, with the highest ticket prices believed to be in the history of the city, so it would have been the record indoor gate for the city at approximately $120,000, which has one of the richest wrestling tradition of any city in the world. Halloween and Damien both interfered throughout the match, but Konnan did a surprise run-in during the third fall and helped Nicho to the victory. Mysterio Sr. got a $13,500 payoff for his hair, while Nicho got $2,500. Also on the show, Universo 2000 retained the CMLL heavyweight title, beating Rayo de Jalisco Jr., and Damien and Halloween won over Thunderbird and Mosco de la Merced in a match that started as a tag match in which the members of the losing team would then have to face each other in a hair versus hair match. Thunderbird beat Mosco in the ensuing match, and Mosco shaved his head. Mosco, who had always appeared with a mask in Tijuana and it was supposed to be at stake if he lost, came out wearing a mask, but it was then announced to the fans that he had in Nuevo Laredo lost his mask to Antifaz del Norte 6 days earlier. He did lose his match to Antifaz, but that was in 1998. He took the mask off and wrestled without it. When he lost, he had his head shaved. Fans booed when Nicho came out by himself, because it had been advertised that Konnan and Ray Jr. would be there and in his corner. Ray Jr. couldn't be there because it was his wedding anniversary, so Thunderbird, who had already lost his hair, came out as Nicho's second. Fans didn't accept that, and it was made worse when the heels laid him out after a Martinete tombstone piledriver. Roberto Rangel, a straight-down-the-middle ref at Arena Mexico, and considered the most respected referee in Mexico dating back to the 50s, came out during the second fall after bad officiating had cost Nicho the first fall. The pop when Nicho scored the pin was said to be the loudest, most sustained pop in the building in years, and it was considered monumental since Rey Sr. had never lost a hair match in Tijuana, which has been his home base for 20 years. The May 19th show at Arena Mexico is being headlined by Villano Tercero and Perro Arguello vs. Pierroth Jr. and Mascara Anno 2000. The May 12th main event saw Atlantis and V3 and Arguello over Pierroth Jr. and Mascara 2000 in Shocker. AAA is doing a TV taping in the same building on May 19th, headlined by Perro Arguello Jr. vs. El Texano in a hair versus hair match and Connect vs. Cibernetico in a dog collar match. Antonio Pena has dropped the Spice Boys gimmick, since it's already passé, and the 4 guys are now going by the names of Batman, Robin, Spider-Man, and Superman. Neutron, the name of the famed heel in the Santo movies, became a pro wrestling character debuting on May 9th at Arena Coliseo as a babyface high flyer. Pena is trying to bring the original Mosco de la Merced back to feud with the new version as part of his AAA vs. LLL feud. There will be a Legends of Wrestling show on May 31st in Monterrey, headlined by Rayo de Jalisco Sr., 67, who was the Dusty Rhodes of his day in Mexico and did some for AAA as late as the mid-90s. To American fans, the biggest name on the bill is Darrell Dixon, 63, who was a big star in the late 50s and early 60s in the United States before going to Mexico and becoming an all-time legend as one of the first top-class bodybuilders in pro wrestling under the name Dory Dixon. Also on the bill include the original El Matematico, 60, Alcon Ortiz, 47, who was a Texas headliner in the 70s, Tony Salazar, 47, Coloso Colasetti, 54, who California fans from the early 70s would remember, Scorpio Sr., 52, Milo Ventura, 50, the original Ultraman who feuded with Tiger Mask in Japan in the early 80s, and Cuchillo, 51, who in the late 80s feuded with Yoshihiro Asai, later Ultimo Dragon, over the UA middleweight title in both Mexico and Japan. The annual AAA Champion of Champions tournament will be held in a 6-sided ring on May 31st in Aguascalientes. Brazo de Oro beat Valentin Mayo in a hair versus hair match on May 1st at Arena Coliseo in Mexico City, which was reported as being the shortest hair versus hair match in the history of Mexico City pro wrestling. The 3 falls in total lasted 5 minutes. EMLL sold out Arena Coliseo and its 5,500 seats on consecutive nights on April 30th and May 1st. All Japan. Vader had an operation on his left elbow and will be out for at least 2 more months. Because of the financial problems with FMW, the original Hayabusa is said to be looking for work here. But with rumors rampant about the group splitting, nobody knows what moves to make. Generally speaking, the foreign wrestlers seem to be closer to Motoko Baba, and the natives with Mitsuharu Misawa, but in the long run everyone is going to side with the one who they feel is the most financially secure over the long haul. A bad sign is that All Japan season ticket holders, for ringside at Korakuen Hall and Budokan Hall, have not been sent renewals when their season tickets run out. Which is another sign of office instability because that's guaranteed money ahead of time from the most loyal part of the fan base. New Japan. New Japan Pro Wrestling will be going public in the near future, similar to WWF. It would be the first Japanese pro wrestling company to have an IPO. Weekly Fight magazine reported this week that New Japan would offer a season ticket subscription pay-per-view service for the year 2000, similar to many American sports teams on a regional basis. In a Tokyo Sports interview, Tatsumi Fujinami denied the story, but the newspaper the next day also printed the story that next year New Japan would cut down from 137 to 100 house shows in an attempt to make up the lost revenue through the pay-per-view broadcast through TV Asahi and the BS digital broadcasting system as well as the internet. The idea is that all 100 house shows would be available live to paying subscribers on digital cable as well as the internet. I would presume this would mean that they would be available, at least through the internet, to Americans as well, which would be a first, although at this point the video on the web isn't up to what most would consider enjoyable television viewing broadcast standards. No doubt that will change within a few years, and I'd suspect it won't be that many years before all the major offices offer similar plans. WCW tried webcasting some major events in 1998, but apparently there were problems since they stopped doing it. There is already some fear that making all the house shows available live on a form of pay-per-view would kill the live attendance at the shows. The dates for the G1 Climax tournament, which is the in-ring highlight of the year, although with the talent level in this promotion right now I don't see how it could possibly compare to past years, will take place August 7th and August 8th at Osaka Furitsu Gym, August 9th at the Hiroshima Sun Plaza Arena, the first time G1 has ever come to Hiroshima, and August 11th, August 12th and August 13th at its traditional home of Tokyo Sumo Hall. After the next tour, they will have a tour from June 25th to July 20th, ending in Sapporo at the Doritsu Sports Center, followed by the one-week G1 tournament. They've cut the September tour, which will be the annual G1 Climax Tag Team Tournament, down to 1 week, from September 10th to September 17th, with the major show on September 16th in Nagoya and the finals on September 17th in Sagami. October will have an 18-show tour from October 8th to October 29th, ending in Kobe at World Memorial Hall. The final tour of the year will be November 8th to December 10th. Kazuyuki Fujita is wanting to tour Europe to learn more from European submission experts for his return to fighting in Pride over the summer. The top matches for the next tour, built around the Best of the Super Juniors tournament, were announced this past week. The matchmaking is very uninspiring these days, but they also don't have a lot to work with. As far as major shows are concerned, on May 21st in Shizuoka it'll be Dr. Wagner Jr. and Kendo Kashin and Jushin Liger vs Minoru Tanaka and Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Shinjiro Otani, Yuji Nagata and Manabu Nakanishi vs Michiyoshi Ohara and Satoshi Kojima, tournament matches with Koji Kanemoto vs El Samurai and Minoru Fujita vs Kid Romeo, and a main event of Kenzo Suzuki. Is it early or what for this guy to be headlining? And Kensuke Sasaki and Yutaka Yoshi vs Scott Norton and Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Masahiro Chono. May 28th in Nagano has Tadao Yasuda vs Yoshi Suzuki and Sasaki vs Tenzan and Norton, Kanemoto vs Shinya Makabe, Fujita vs Kashin and Brian Johnston and Nagata and Nakanishi vs Ohara and Chono and Tatsutoshi Goto. The biggest show of the tour on June 2nd at Budokan Hall has a terribly weak lineup for such a big building and will result in weak sales, as the only actual special event is the return of Osamu Nishimura, who will have his first match in nearly 2 years after being stricken with testicular cancer. The main event on the show is Sasaki vs Nakanishi for the IWGP Heavyweight title, plus the tournament matches are Kanemoto vs Gran Hamada, Shinjiro Otani vs Fujita and Romeo vs Katsumi Yujita plus Tanaka and Liger vs Takaiwa and Kashin. The final show of the tour on June 9th at Osaka Chuo Gymnasium will have 6 junior heavyweight singles matches. The 6th place finisher in the A and B block wrestle each other, followed by the 5th in each block, and the 4th, etc., until the champion from each block faces off, with the winner capturing the tournament and getting a title shot at Jushin Liger later in the year. Also in Osaka announced are Suzuki and Katsuyori Shibata vs Hiroshi Tanahashi and Yasuda and Yoshi and Nagata and Nakanishi vs Kojima and Tenzan and Chono. Other Japan notes. The Crush Gals return on May 14th at the Ariake Coliseum for Gia's 5th anniversary show was considered a huge success as a 4.5-hour house show before a sellout 9,000 fans, selling out well in advance, making it the biggest women's house show in years. Chigusa Nagao and Linus Asuka, the most popular women's wrestling tag team in history, who were both wrestling and pop music superstars in the mid-80s, reformed their team after nearly 12 years to beat Devil Masami and Akira Hokuto in 2028 in the main event. They debuted a new finisher called Over the Crush, where Asuka picked Hokuto up in a powerbomb position and Nagao delivered a diamond cutter on her. The building was said to be filled with many women around the age of 30, who were teenagers during the heyday of the Crush Gals, and a crowd split almost 50-50 among men and women. The crowd heat was said to be huge and the ring was filled with red and blue streamers for the ring intro reminiscent of their glory days. Reports were that the show set an all-time pro wrestling record for streams thrown and purchased. At one point Masami and Hokuto delivered double scorpion deathlocks on the Crush Gals. That was a Crush Gals 80s spot, and Nagao and Asuka both juiced. After the match, they said they would continue to team and form a group in Gia called Crush 2000 with Sugar Sato and Chikeo Nagashima. Also on the show, Asia Kong retained the AW title pin Mako Satomura. Kong's next title defense will be against Mayumi Ozaki, who beat Kaoru in 28-36 in a match to determine the top contender. Nagashima and Sato retained the AW tag titles, beating Toshie Uematsu and Bloody. Akira Maeda returned from the United States furious about Gilbert Yvel, his current world heavyweight champion, signing with Pride, and announced upon his return that Yvel was stripped of his version of the world heavyweight title. As it pertains to FMW's plans in the United States as marketed by TokyoPop.com, they will be releasing 2 home videos per month over the next 6 months. All Japan Women ran a major show on May 12th in Sapporo before an announced 3,200 headlined by a series of interpromotional main events. Manami Toyota retained the WWA title, beating Ran Yuyu of JWP in 21-35 with the Japanese Ocean Cyclone Suplex. Fumiko Maekawa and Tomoko Watanabe retained the WWA tag titles, winning February 3 falls from Atsuko Mita and Mima Shimoda. AJW Team KO Nomi and Miho Wakizawa won the All Japan Women's Tag belts, beating JWP's Tsubasa Kurogaki and Misaki Kana. After the main event, they announced that Kaoru Ito would be Toyota's next challenger for the title as part of 3 straight nights of big shows from July 14th through July 16th. Toyota on May 6th had lost a fall in a 6-person match to LLPW's Eagle Sawai, so Sawai is being set up as a new challenger. Rai Kutosen, 36, a former sumo wrestler who for the past several years has been a political figure in the Japanese Diet, equivalent to the Senate, announced his retirement from politics to go into pro wrestling. That is a very old age to start. About the only wrestler I can ever recall who started that late who actually became a long-term star was Bad News Allen. IWA Japan will be running a tour from May 24th through May 27th using gorgeous Michelle Starr from British Columbia as a main event. He'll doing the gay gimmick. Rip Rogers got over pretty big with All Japan, since he was different from everyone else on the show, doing a similar gimmick to Starr. Technically Rogers played a street hustler as opposed to a gay gimmick, although as you can imagine given who the promoter was, he didn't last long there anyway. Also coming to the IWA tour is Goliath El Gigante, who formerly wrestled in the WWF as Kurgan. Tetsuo Sekagawa, Mr. Pogo, announced the formation of his own promotion on May 12th called WWS, one of the initials probably standing for One Staring, which was a Japanese hardcore company from many years back that had something of a cult following. They debut in his hometown of Isazaki on May 29th with Shoji Nakanami and Goro Tsurumi, plus Pogo is attempting to get Kentaro Kanemura and Mitsuhiro Matsunaga, who were all-stars with the original One Staring office. Katsumi Yujuda won the independent junior title on the May 11th Battle Arts show at Korakuen Hall from Minoru Tanaka. LLPW president and wrestlers Rumi Kazama, fighting under her real name Rumi Saito, lost in the first round of the Asian Taekwondo Championship held on May 13th in Hong Kong to a Chinese fighter who beat her when the referee stopped the match. Shadow WX won Big Japan's World Extreme Cup tournament on May 14th in Kawasaki, beating Combat Zone wrestling promoter John Zandig in the finals. WX was all cut up and they poured lemon juice and salt on his wounds. Wife beater came out and used a chainsaw to cut up WX's arm. Match ended up with the CZW guys setting a table on fire and threw WX into the fire, but the finish saw WX superplex Zandig through the burning table. In the tournament third place match, Tomoaki Honma pinned Crazy Chic, Julio Estrada, who is Rico Suave in WWC. They also had a loser leaves town match with Men's Teo changing his name to Terry Boy, his original name in Michinoku Pro Wrestling, where his role was a young Japanese wrestler whose idol was Terry Funk, beating Abdullah the Butcher, Terry Funk's greatest rival in Japan, in 1829. Can you imagine seeing Butcher at his age in a match that long? Abdullah Jr. Kobayashi threw powder in Butcher's face to lead to the finish. Butcher is expected out of Big Japan until the late summer, with the main angle in the promotion being Big Japan vs CZW. There was really no place in the main matches for Butcher. They also had an 8-person elimination match to determine a bunkhouse scramble title, and woman wrestler Kyoko Ichiki ended up pinning promoter Shinya Kojika to become the first champion. There is a story in the premiere issue of Maximum Golf magazine about Brian Fleming, who is a club repair specialist at the Callaway headquarters in Carlsbad, California, who wrestles on area indie shows as Alcatraz, playing the role of a con who enters the ring in shackles. Here and there. Although this is not a pro wrestling story, it does relate a lot to pro wrestlers. The results of the first survey of ex-NFL football players relating to the long-term effects of concussions was released this past week during the American Academy of Neurology's 52nd annual meeting. A survey of more than 1,000 retired NFL players, 60% of whom suffered at least one concussion during their career and 26% of whom had suffered at least 3, showed that players who had suffered a concussion were more likely to have long-term neurological complaints, among them memory problems, speech or hearing impairment, numbness in their extremities, and headaches. Although a great deal is written in the lay press about this issue, there is little documentation in the medical literature, said Dr. Barry Jordan, director of the Brain Injury Program at Burke Rehabilitation Hospital in White Plains, New York, the primary author of the study. Jordan noted flaws in his own study because the results were obtained via questionnaire and that more research is needed, but that if further research confirms the findings of the study, that NFL players should be tested regularly for potential neurological symptoms. Lineup for the Brian Pillman Memorial Show on May 25th in Cincinnati, Ohio at Xavier University. First, they are having an indie show at 5:30 p.m. with Rory Fox and Logan Kane versus Jeremy Lopez and Jet Jaguar, Rico Constantino versus BJ Payne, Chuck Palumbo versus Sean O'Hare, Reckless Youth versus Scotty Saber, Cody Hawk and Anthony McMurphy versus Flash Flanagan and Matt Stryker, Shark Boy versus Jamie Sand, Young Dragons, and a Heartland Wrestling Association title match with Chip Fairway involved. The main show has Cody Michaels versus Terry Taylor, Tom Pritchard, with Jim Cornette, versus Tim Horner, with Missy Hyatt, Ronan and Don Harris versus Vampiro, and David Flair with Dimitri Young of the Cincinnati Reds as ref, Billy Kidman, with Tori Wilson, versus Chris Condito, with Tammy Sitch, D'Lo Brown versus Road Dogg, Shane Douglas versus perhaps Ric Flair, but it's not a definite he'll be attending, a 3-way with Dean Malenko versus Perry Saturn versus Eddie Guerrero, Justin Credible versus Raven for the ECW title, and main event of Chris Benoit versus Steven Regal. David Arquette is donating all his pay from WCW to be split 3 ways for the families of Brian Pillman, Ryan Hildebrand, and Darren Drozdoff. ECW has May 25th booked in Columbus, Ohio, and moved the date to May 26th to keep from having a conflict with this show. Atsushi Onita announced that he would be doing an explosive barbed wire match on June 25th in Philadelphia against Terry Funk. This is the long talked about match that Combat Zone Wrestling was to be promoting. Sabu worked on May 12th in Hazlet, New Jersey for NWA Jersey, beating Ace Darling. After the match, Chris Condito and Tammy Sitch attacked him to set up a match over the summer between the two in Keensburg, New Jersey over the XPW title. TSN's Off the Record is producing a 1-hour special on the escalating violence in television sports, focusing on pro wrestling, hockey and NHB fighting, scheduled to air on June 22nd. Randy Savage's appearance at the Roller Jam tapings over the weekend was cancelled with no explanation given, other than Roller Jam is attempting to still get him to appear at future tapings. Blue Meanie left Memphis to move back to Philadelphia to be closer to his grandmother, who is having health problems, so he's left the Memphis Championship Wrestling circuit. The WWF is trying to get ECW to take him back. The promotional war in Puerto Rico continues. WWC has filed for an injunction to prevent Juan Rivera, who is better known as Savio Vega, from using the ring name TNT, which was the name he got over huge in the island with more than a decade ago in their company. The issue came up legally several years ago and was never resolved. Rivera used the TNT name in the past outside of the WWC, most notably while wrestling for both All Japan and New Japan. Ricky Banderas and Huevo Gran Apollo captured the IWA tag titles in a 3-way over previous champs Miguel Perez and Huracan Castillo Jr. and Victor the Bodyguard and Chicky Star before 420 fans on May 14th in Moca, Puerto Rico. Although WWC announced that Public Enemy was coming, they were actually never booked, and the Pitbulls have now been announced as coming in their place. Ratings for last week saw WWC on May 6th drew an 8.9 rating and 35 share, while IWA drew an 8.2 and 29 share. On May 7th, WWC drew an 11.2 rating and 39 share, while IWA drew a 5.5 rating and a 17 share. IWA's next major show will be on June 16th, although they don't have an arena booked, but are looking to run with cheaper ticket prices than the April 28th show and closer to San Juan, where there is more American cable penetration. They've got Edge, Christian, Too Cool, Crash Holly, Angle, Saturn and Takamichi Inoku from WWF for that show. Headhunter number 1, who has been out of action for several months due to fluid in his lungs, should be returning soon. FX is putting together for its Tough Man Friday night show a series of theme shows. The first one, at least on the drawing board, is pro wrestlers versus NFL football players, where they would have a tournament of 8 men and 4 alternates that would be taped on June 4th and probably air on June 9th. The wrestlers will be Southern California guys from Ultimate Pro Wrestling. At this point there is no site, nor any names of football players, although it's not expected there will be any name people on either list. Pennsylvania Championship Wrestling drew its record crowd and record gross on May 12th in Hamburg, Pennsylvania of 923 paid for a show that included Fabulous Moolah, Mae Young and Jimmy Valiant, and headlined with a ladder match where Cheetah Master won the PCW title from Michael Modest. This show outdrew many shows in the past that featured a lot of what would be considered bigger TV stars at that moment. Bruno Sammartino will be a guest at the June 17th return to Hamburg, as well as former Nitro Girl Fire. Southern States Wrestling ran a Mark Curtis, Brian Hildebrand tribute show on May 13th in Kingsport, Tennessee before 259 fans, which included Cody Michaels, Buddy Landell, Manny Fernandez, and Tracy Smothers. They held the second annual Kingsport Wrestling Hall of Fame inductions at the show of Hildebrand, accepted by his wife, Wahoo McDaniel Fernandez, Ron Wright, Whitey Caldwell, who passed away in a 1972 auto accident and was the all-time most popular wrestler in the city, and Earl Walters. Yokozuna worked in a 6-man tag along with Justin Credible on May 12th in Meriden, Connecticut for the Millennium Wrestling Association. Reports were that he looked slightly larger than his WWF days, which is really scary. If that guy could have only managed his weight, he could be a really wealthy man by now. The only thing he did in the match was one leg drop. Credible, who teamed with him, got a huge pop, bigger than the former WWF champion. Sabu is expected to work for Stampede Wrestling from June 8th to June 11th, including June 9th TV taping in Calgary. MMA. The problem with DSC is that it's run like a pro wrestling organization and not like a sport. That's okay in the marketing aspect, but not in the game itself. It's been discussed already how it's impossible to have a tournament when the rules aren't the same for every fight, such as the no time limit provision specific only for Royce Gracie's matches and the final. They even tried to change the rules as the show went on. Because the show ran so long, before the Mark Coleman vs. Igor Vovchanchyn final, the promotion asked both fighters to change the final from the original no time limit provision to a fight under the rules of the non-Gracie prelims of 1 round, judge's decision, and if it's close, go into a 1-round overtime before a final judge's decision. Vovchanchyn refused to accept, because such rules on paper looked to favor Coleman, the wrestler who could control the fight on the ground, as opposed to Vovchanchyn, with a big knockout punch who can end the fight. DSC is very close to putting together a deal for a Frank Shamrock vs. Sakuraba match to determine the top under 200-pound fighter in the world. Shamrock is also considering fighting on a big show at the San Jose Arena in the fall. Ken Shamrock's hopes are to do a fight in either August or October, against a fighter of the caliber of Kazuyuki Fujita. He's hoping to fight someone who will test him on physical strength, which Alexander Otska wasn't able to, before a February fight against one of the top 5 fighters in the world. Shamrock's current contract with DSC only calls for the February fight. DSC is tentatively planning another spectacular for the summer at the 40,000-seat Seibu Dome, home of the Seibu Lions in Tokorozawa, which is about an hour outside of Tokyo. One match on the June 4th DSC show in Nagoya at Rainbow Hall is Gary Goodridge, and this is awfully quick to be bringing somebody back who lost by a knockout on May 1st, versus Rico Rodriguez. There is talk of matching up Sakuraba with Gilbert Yvel, but after Sakuraba fought 105 minutes on May 1st and Sakuraba went into the fight with a foot injury, he really needs some time off, particularly against an opponent who is bigger and so dangerous. Coming off the Gracie win on May 1st, TBS in Japan, Channel 8 in Tokyo, on May 14th ran a 30-minute television special on Sakuraba that aired at 11 p.m. Jim Rome's The Last Word on Fox Sports on May 23rd will have a segment on MMA with IFC promoter Paul Smith and fighter John Lewis debating attorney Vance Mandelker representing the New York State Athletic Commission, which was involved in having the sport banned in that state. The show was taped on May 12th. For those who saw the Gracie Sakuraba match and respected the family's sportsmanship in defeat, we give you these comments by Hoyce on Eddie Goldman's Ayata.com internet show, which airs from 3 to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday as the lead-in for Wrestling Observer Live. Hoyce claimed that Sakuraba tapped out in the match. There was a point in the match where Sakuraba was caught in a guillotine he was in zero danger of submitting from and did tap to tease Hoyce. The rules state you tap 4 times and it's a concession. Sakuraba teased Hoyce by tapping 3 times like a pro wrestler teasing a false finish. Gracie claimed Sakuraba was saved by the round ending. He said he beat Sakuraba up for the first 75 minutes of the fight and his knuckles and knees were black and blue from pounding him and claimed he dominated the stand-up portion of the fight. It's clear from watching that Sakuraba early on tried to conserve as much energy as possible and tire Gracie out first, since a no-time limit match can be a pure stamina game, and he played the game perfectly. Sakuraba actually suffered a foot or ankle injury before the Gracie match but didn't let it out publicly until afterwards, and won't be fighting on the June 4th Pride show due to the injury. In what really shouldn't be considered an upset, but shocked the promotion that thought he had no chance to win nonetheless, Dan Severn captured the World Extreme Fighting World Heavyweight title beating Marcus Conan Silveira via submission with a triangle choke in 4:46. Severn, who turns 42 in a few weeks, shot an angle after the show with Extreme Challenge heavyweight champion Bobby Hoffman. They had actually choreographed a pro wrestling angle for Hoffman and Silveira for after Silveira's expected win, but Severn spoiled the plans. Mark Kerr was also there doing a pro wrestling contract signing angle for an upcoming show when Hoffman issued a challenge to him. Due to the connection of MMA to pro wrestling, especially at the top level where so many of the top fighters are either pro wrestlers or want to be pro wrestlers, the idea of doing angles, albeit primitive in nature, becomes natural instinct. And with promoters who think they know for sure who is going to win because they are experts. And one thing we've learned is you can never accurately predict close-booked MMA over the long haul because there are so many intangibles. Often plan ahead and those plans get spoiled faster than ECW long-term plans. Apparently the acting was so bad that nobody in the crowd bought it. Unlike when Ken Shamrock and Alexander Otska did their angle in San Jacinto, California, you could tell it was total pro wrestling but the crowd liked it. It would have probably not been so bad had Hoffman not looked sluggish in winning a decision earlier in the show. The show drew 3,000 fans to Roberts Stadium in Evansville, Indiana, but only $970 was paid for a gate of about $27,000, and that's with a $15,000 local ad budget. There were a lot of complaints about the way promoter Jamie Levine marketed the event, such as banned in 11 states and emphasizing it as bare-knuckle fighting, despite the fact all competitors were mandated to wear gloves, emphasizing the blood in local radio interviews since tickets weren't moving. Levine even made the statement that all the fighters had to pick out coffins for themselves during the weigh-ins, and Levine, when asked if the sport was violent, emphasized saying it was very violent. As you can tell, all of this publicity resulted in no tickets being sold. There were also complaints that the TV ads showed a brutal kick to the head that has since been banned under WEF rules. The local hook-and-shoot promotion, using no-name local fighters, outdraws that 70% of the time playing in Old Coliseum for regular shows. Dave Mena upset Jose Pele Landi, the top-rated under 170-pound fighter in the world, by a decision, and what many thought was a robbery of a decision, others felt it was a very close fight that should have been a draw after an overtime. Yoshihisa Yamamoto of Rings tapped out from repeated strikes from the top, giving up his back and getting choked out against Brandon Lee Hinkle in something of an upset in only 2:21. Wataru Sakata of Rings also appeared on the show, beating Mansoor Haidari via decision after 12 minutes. Akira Maeda was one of the judges on the show. The show airs as a pay-per-view in Canada on May 27. New Jersey's Athletic Commission has given tentative approval for a show to be held in Atlantic City at the Tropicana Hotel. There was a press conference on May 11 regarding the rules in the May 26 Hickson Gracie vs. Masakatsu Funaki match. Masami Ozaki agreed for Funaki that they would do the fight without headbutts but was still attempting to get elbows legalized in the rules. The Coliseum 2000 promotion said they would negotiate with Gracie over the elbows. There is a lot of criticism for Rings regarding business of having put Gilbert Yvel in a title match against its top star, Kiyoshi Tamura, on the final match of his contract. Logic would say they shouldn't have put him in the position to win a title without signing a contract extension, but then again we've seen, in pro wrestling, similar things happening and they can control the outcomes. It now appears that Tamura, due to the beating he took in that fight, won't be able to do his scheduled match with Jeremy Horn at the Tokyo Dome. Jeff Blatnick was the commencement speaker at the Springfield College graduation on May 14. Blatnick, who is the UFC color commentator and 1984 Olympic gold medalist as well as a motivational speaker, wrestled and graduated from Springfield in 1979 and was given an honorary doctorate from the college in 1987. ECW. ECW filed lawsuits in federal court in New York against both Rob Black, the owner of Extreme Pro Wrestling in California, and Terry Brunk, Sabu. Black was sued for tortious interference of a contract, using Brunk while he was under contract to ECW, and for copyright infringement, using the word extreme, just spelled differently, which would theoretically create confusion in the marketplace as well as the similarities of logo. Brunk was sued for breach of contract. Tanaka is looking to sign a full-time ECW contract, which tells you more about the financial problems in FMW. ECW will be debuting on June 3 in Pensacola and in July in both Dallas and Houston. The May 18th show in Birmingham was cancelled due to a poor advance. Most blame it on the fact that the pay-per-view show there was papered so strongly that people weren't willing to spend money for tickets for a minor house show after being easily able to get free tickets for a pay-per-view. The schedule through the next several weeks is back down to only 2 house shows per week. The situation with Jason Knight is tenuous. Knight is still under contract but wasn't part of the pay-per-view. The ECW debut in Canada is tentatively set for September 30th in Mississauga, ONT at the Hershey Center. TNN on May 12th was taped in Minneapolis. It was a so-so show, actually pretty flat leading into a pay-per-view, and was terrible as a go-home show for a pay-per-view with little in the way of interviews hyping the matches, and few matches even announced or built in storyline. It opened with Sinister Minister, Jim Mitchell, making an inside reference to Jackie Crockett before Mikey Whipwreck threw fire at the cameraman. They did the TNN Open. When Joel Gertner did his catchphrase, Joey Styles was bent over like he had a cramp. Dreamer came out and actually didn't even say a word before Simon Diamond interrupted him. This led to a match with Dreamer winning in 7:33 with a DDT. Diamond came off as a very poor man's Raven with an entourage of Prodigy, Tom Marquez, Prodijet, Angel Orsini I believe, who is doing a gimmick where she almost looks like a man and is supposed to be Prodigy's twin sister, and the two are screw-ups, and the Musketeer. Dreamer shoved the saber of the Musketeer up his butt and Gertner said douche, pronounced as rhyming with touche as opposed to its correct pronunciation. Prodijet missed a moonsault, and this was a missed moonsault like you've almost never seen. Storm beat Lynn in a good match at 6:03 after Credible hit Lynn, aiming for Storm with the cane. Dreamer came out to attack Credible and Storm dove on both of them. Cyrus then came out and insulted the fans in Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota. Actually, more fans cheered at getting insulted than usual. When Cyrus said the state was filled with idiots, there were noticeable cheers, and when he said they were so stupid they voted for Ventura, you saw people clapping everywhere, not the majority, but more than enough to be noticed. Cyrus compared Lynn to other Minnesota heroes like Frank Tarkenton, Greg Gagne, and Prince. Cyrus noted Lynn was a protege of Brad Rheingans and said he learned to wrestle like him, but also compared his interview ability to Rheingans, which everyone in the audience seemed to recognize as a huge insult, and Cyrus called him a ratings killer. Tao came out and Lynn attacked him, but said he did that for himself and blew Cyrus off again with some words that were bleeped out. After Lynn walked out, Corino and Victory attacked Tao, who made a comeback and laid them both out. This led to another Rhino vs. Tao match. Tao was real good, but it was too short, ending with Rhino doing the piledriver off the apron through a table for the pin in 3:20. Sandman did his requisite run-in, only to be pounded on until Van Dam made the save, and he laid out Rhino with a missile dropkick and frog splash. WCW. The Slamboree buy rate was not released by WCW because the figure was such an embarrassment. It was said to be below and 0.2, making it at least one of the 3 lowest pay-per-view buy rates in company history. So much for the mainstream curiosity buys of Arquette and the successful rub of Kidman by Hogan, and how much all that internet hype for 7 years by Douglas for a match with Flair actually means in real life. It's clear that however nice a guy Arquette is, he cost the company business at every turn because it was something wrestling fans rejected. The company should have realized it when the rating came in for Thunder the day after that switch, and more so when the Nitro rating came in after whatever mainstream hype it had gotten. But they decided to swerve themselves right out of another buy rate because they wanted him to go into a pay-per-view main event. The next show will do a lot better, but putting Flair and Hogan's career on the line on the same show would even at this stage of the game do a good number and should do a huge number, except nobody actually believes in their stipulations. The idea for the top of the card is Nash versus Jarrett, Rick versus David with Rick's career on the line, and Hogan versus Kidman with Hogan's career on the line, Sting versus Vampiro in a ring surrounded by fire match, DDP versus Awesome in an ambulance match, Scott Steiner versus Abbott in a shoot fight, maybe in a cage nitro on May 15th in Biloxi, Mississippi had 8,550 in the building, which was 2,893, paying $63,040. It was probably, due to Flair, the best nitro at least since the April 10th show. In a very strange match, Sting beat Vampiro in a House of Pain cage match in 5:25. The object was to handcuff the opponent to the cage. Sting sold more than usual but seemed to easily handcuff him, then gave him a few, as in 2 or 3, body blocks and simply left, 7 minutes early. The lights went out and Vampiro disappeared. Douglas attacked Clark in the parking lot. The MIAs, which is a remake of the Oddity/Sable deal in WWF, saw Tylene Buck, now called Major Guns, Chavo Guerrero Jr. is Lieutenant Loco and Van Hammer as Major Stash. As stupid as this sounds, they wanted him to be Private Stash as an inside joke, but he cried about it because Private was the lowest rank and he didn't want to be seen as the lowest ranking oddity. Adams challenged Douglas to come out. Douglas brought out Wall as his partner and they had the match. Douglas then walked out on Wall. Wall put both guys through a table and turned his back on both of them, and they got up and double choke slammed him through a table and Adams pinned him in 3:30. It was terrible. At one point the table didn't break, so Wall tried to pick Adams up from an impromptu table spot and Adams didn't want to go up. Wall put a paramedic through a table after the match. Bischoff blew off Disco and asked Funk to give him the hardcore belt. Funk said no, so Miller jumped him. They kept showing the Goldberg truck. The belief, and this may be true, is that this truck means more ratings than any of the wrestlers. With the exception of Flair, I'd bet money on that. Funk beat the entire Filthy Animals except Kidman in a handicap bout for the title. Miller attacked Funk as well. The MIAs bounced around the Animals until Disco saved to become a Filthy Animal. Booker T then bounced around the Animals, who should be nicknamed the Pinballs, and Funk pinned Hoovy in 3 minutes. Major Guns then gave Funk mouth-to-mouth. Smiley and Ralphus got a job at the popcorn stand until Ralphus was picking his butt and putting his hand in the popcorn. Crowbar and Daphne won the Cruiserweight title from Condito and Tammy in 5:18. Remember when Bischoff said how they were going to re-establish the Cruiserweight belt with the Good Workers? This ended with Miss Hancock dancing. Sitch gave Daphne the worst stunner in history to 0 pop, and it's hard not to get a pop doing that move. She got up to celebrate and got schoolgirled. It wasn't made clear if Crowbar or Daphne was now the champ. I think both of them. Flair came out to destroy Crowbar. In the middle of this great Flair angle, Sting went to the parking lot and his car was in flames. What a waste of money doing an angle that nobody cared about. Russo and David were at the Flair home in Charlotte and this was priceless stuff about how Reed is the favored one, saying that David had to sleep in the garage and swim in a shark-infested creek. Russo was jumping up and down in Flair's bed. Russo stole one of Rick's robes and confronted his wife and 2 youngest children. It was tremendous stuff. Rick then confronted David and Daphne, who came out with some of Rick's old title belts. He challenged David to a match. Flair was tremendous. Jarrett laid out Rick with a guitar shot and put him in the figure 4. Medusa versus Liz were supposed to have a cage match, but Luger came dressed as a cage repair man into the cage and saved Liz. Russo came out and hit Luger with a low blow, but he was wearing a cup so he no-sold it and rubbed the cup in Russo's mouth. The security maced Luger. After 19 straight shows of getting maced, you'd think he'd wear a mask or something. Palumbo attacked Luger with that 60s comic booker Twister deal. Nash's music played and all 12 guys as security freaked while Nash beat up all of them while Russo ran off with Liz and Palumbo escaped. Awesome attacked Nash. Nash challenged Awesome and called him Eddie Money, who was a rock star probably when Nash was in college, and challenged him to an ambulance match. Scott Steiner went outside for a street fight with Tank and Rick, who were beating on him until the Goldberg truck made the save. Nash beat Awesome in a bad match in 5:21. Nash nearly killed Awesome with the greatest power bomb in the sport. Just before Awesome faced sure paralysis, DDP made the save and helped Nash do the move before he dropped the guy on his head. Awesome took a bump off the apron onto a heavily gimmick table setting. The match ended with Awesome never put in the ambulance. I think it ended because it was a mercy killing. Ralphus and Smiley got fired. Bischoff challenged Page and asked him to bring backup. Miller and Bischoff were doubling on Page until Sid made the save. Sid was wearing a shirt since due to shoulder problems, he hasn't been able to train well enough where he'd take his shirt off, I guess. Of course, Sid turned on DDP. They've got to bring Page's mom on next week so she can turn on him. Hogan cleaned house. This set up the lowest rated segment of the show with Hogan versus Horace, didn't he retire? Versus Kidman. If Hogan is Terry Bollea, then who is Horace? Horace just stood there much to the chagrin of Bischoff and Kidman while Hulk bounced Kidman around like a ping-pong ball. The idea that Kidman by being in the ring constantly bounced around by Hogan is getting a rub that makes him a bigger star goes against all historical precedents. In the 70s and 80s when TV was largely squash matches and the big stars destroyed job guys, giving them little offense, did the job guys become big stars because they happened to be in the ring with big stars? Even if you note the 1-2-3 aspect, on Nitro Hall used to do these fake jobs where he'd treat a promising wrestler like dirt, Kidman, Hector Garza and Chris Jericho all come to mind, and then act like he slipped on a banana peel and lose to them. Even though he did the job, he smartly knew he was cutting all of their throats even though they probably thanked him at the time because he was a big star losing to them. Anyway, in this match, Torrie Wilson came out and Horace turned on his uncle and hit him with a chair shot for the pin. It only took 1 week for that turn. During the match, Hogan and Horace cleaned house on Bischoff, all the animals and Kidman at the same time with some of the lamest chair shots on record. Wilson left with Horace, which got Kidman mad. Finally, Flair pinned Jarrett with an inside cradle in 6:16 in a good match. Flair at 51 with one arm, he needs shoulder surgery and that may happen in mid-June, in street clothes. They wanted him in trunks since he was winning the world title, but it was one of those communication breakdowns and since they never told him, he didn't bring any trunks. Still has the only good match and great interview on the show and the 2 highest segments while half the young guys who can't draw ratings, have good matches, or even dress well. Think he is the one who is killing the ratings? Since it worked, that guarantees about a 2-week title reign if he's lucky. He'd probably have a longer reign if it flopped in the ratings because then nobody would feel he's a threat to their spot. It was funny watching the pinfall and seeing the announcers all hesitate because they weren't told ahead of title about the switch so they all thought the ref had screwed up and didn't immediately put over the excitement. Someday they'll realize that their insatiable appetite to swerve their employees that are trying to get the product to work is in 90% of the cases the worst thing for business. Well, this regime won't, because they're still trying to swerve themselves into believing the Arquette thing worked. But to their credit, after throwing 100 angles against the wall, they finally got one to stick. Hogan's shoulder has been bothering him as well as his knee. It has been made clear to everyone that Hogan is the man and in all angles he has to be treated as such. Thunder tapings on May 16 from Lafayette, Louisiana. For Worldwide, Corey Williams and Ashley Hudson, as their New South gimmick, beat a pair of twins. Vampiro squashed Colorado Kid. Vampiro got a total face reaction. Candido and Tammy beat Stasiak and Mona. Stasiak walked out. Mona beat up Candido but got Tammy's trademark world's worst stunner and was pinned. Tammy's breast came out twice during the match, once after the stunner. They showed it on a replay which got a big pop. Thunder is Raw started out with the new blood in a school bus. Where did they ever come up with that idea? Douglas came out as the leader. Conan is mad because Douglas is the leader so they argued and everyone fought everyone until the MC came out and they all brawled. Hogan did an interview and got a big face pop. He said if he beats Kidman on June 11th, he gets a title shot on July 9th. Fans actually booed that one. Kidman ran down Hogan. Hogan challenged Horace to a singles match. Jarrett ran down Flair, who came out and clocked Jarrett with the belt. The MC then ran off the rest of the NB. The MIA, Rection and Cajun and Loco and Stash, versus Filthy Animals, Conan and Mysterio Jr. They are doing a great job of letting him rehab, aren't they? And Hoovy and Disco. Tylene Buck shoved her boobs in Disco's face. Stasiak attacks Loco and Booker cleaned house. The gimmick is that Buck gives Loco mouth-to-mouth after to revive him. Hogan versus Hogan started with Kidman yelling at Horace about Wilson, who he came out with. Horace beat up Kidman, what a push he's getting, and went to the ring with Wilson. Horace went to kiss Wilson when Kidman came out again. Hulk then throws Kidman over the top rope through a table and pins Horace. Hogan then kisses Wilson to a big pop. Of course she liked it and walked out on both Kidman and Horace. Luger attacked Palumbo at the gym. Ralphus and Smiley were selling fun t-shirts out of the back of a truck. Miller vs. Funk Hardcore title match sees them brawl to where Ralphus and Norman are selling the shirts. Funk destroyed the car with a chair as does Miller. Smiley hits Miller with a chair and Funk pins him. The Goldberg truck came out to a big pop. Ralphus and Smiley were then arrested for conducting business without a license. Scott Steiner came out wearing a ton of makeup for a black eye and cut up mouth. Scott vs. Awesome in an ambulance match is real quick. Recliner and the Goldberg music is played, but it's Abbott who comes out. Abbott and Rick attack Scott, who holds his own until Awesome joins in. They're about to put Scott on the stretcher when the Goldberg truck made the save. Rick and Tank go after the truck while Scott throws both on the hood of the truck and it backs out of the arena. Scott won the match. Kanyon did an interview working the paralysis from the hospital. Shane, who is in control, is told he has a match against Chronic. All the NB guys then walk out on Douglas. Chronic dragged Douglas into the ring for a match and is getting killed until Wall comes out with table. Douglas grabs the belts and tries to leave, but Wall chokeslams Douglas through the table. Douglas tells Chronic to attack Wall, but instead they chokeslam Douglas and pin him. The crowd didn't care about any of this. Flair gave a tremendous promo and Jarrett came out. Crowbar, David and Daphne all help attacking Flair until Anderson makes the save. Vampiro burned a Sting mask. During the commercial, they soaked the ropes with gasoline. Sting came out, then Vampiro came out and called him Steve and said they would have an Inferno match on the pay-per-view. Sting said that's nuts and he isn't going to do it. At this point the ropes were supposed to catch on fire, but they didn't. The fans started laughing and booing. They retaped it later in the show and it did work, but by that time the arena was almost empty. The main event was supposed to be Rick and Nash and Anderson versus Jarrett and Flair and Crowbar. They show Anderson being beaten up by all three in the back. Flair and Jarrett are in the ring until David and Daphne and Crowbar attack him. Nash cleans house. Flair puts Daphne in the figure 4. Jarrett hits Nash with a chair, who no-sells it. Flair acted like he was having a heart attack. The show ended with the MC tipping over the NB bus and the Goldberg truck ran over it. Nitro on May 22nd from Grand Rapids, Michigan starts 1 hour early due to NBA playoffs. Mike Awesome, was interviewed by Mike Mooneyham in the Charleston Post-Courier as well as the Wrestling Observer hotline regarding his leaving ECW. He said that due to legal reasons he can't give his side of the story until July 20th, but said he wasn't happy in the company. He said his leaving came from discussions with Vince Russo, Hulk Hogan and Horace Mike Balia, who is Alfonso's first cousin. Mike Balia is Hogan's nephew, but Alfonso and Terry Balia aren't related, and said he left largely due to Hogan's prompting as he convinced him that ECW was a minor league compared with WCW. In the interview, Alfonso stated that he was, surprisingly, for a guy who made his name in FMW and ECW, personally against the use of blood in matches, citing health concerns for his view. WCW wanted to bring in Dawn Marie with Lance Storm, but she had 2 years remaining on her ECW deal. Because WCW has had so much trouble drawing in traditional markets, they are trying to run as many shows as possible in markets they haven't run before or have run sparingly, and that WWF doesn't go into. Also, starting in September, they are trying to do more international events such as tours of England, South Africa, Australia, Germany, and Canadian dates. There aren't necessarily firm dates in all these locations, but the idea is to put them together since the last England and Germany tours were huge successes and they've never been to South Africa and Australia, both of which have a strong track record at various times in history for pro wrestling. For whatever this is worth, and it's very little at this point, we'd consider this as Flair's 18th reign as world champion, although you could make a case for 20 as well. Thunder on May 9th in Springfield, Illinois went like this. One thing to note is they had a new open, and there was no Ric Flair in the open. Condito beat Crowbar in 451. They missed a lot of moves early, but it got better, and for effort if nothing else was the best match on the show. Bischoff asked Funk to give him the hardcore title, but Funk refused. They showed segments throughout the show of Russo taking David, Flair, Crowbar and Daphne around New York. They took him to a quarter-adult video house and acted as if David had never seen a naked woman before. David and Crowbar were hilarious, although after David's torrid love affair last season with Tori Wilson, let alone being Ric Flair's son, that was pretty preposterous. Funk beat all members of Harlem Heat in 319 when Big T hit Stevie Ray to turn face, and as they were fighting, Funk pinned Cash after a chair shot. Funk came out with chickens on each hand like they were boxing gloves. Pretty bad. Vampiro did an interview with 10A. They built to a spot where Vampiro acted like he was going to bite the head off Sting's crow, but Sting made the save and beat the hell out of Vampiro. After being beaten up, Vampiro started laughing. Vampiro was making references to Steve Borden not wanting to work. he'd rather stay home, his gimmick is just another acting gig. When Sting pounded on him, he called Vampiro Ian. Strange and Sting came off totally heelish and Vampiro totally face-ish, which is probably the idea. Stasiak beat LaRue in 309 with a fisherman's suplex after Hennig interfered. They said that Hennig had gotten LaRue, who is now going to be called Corporal Cajun, reinstated. Liz vs. Rhonda Singh went 153 when Luger ran in and racked Singh. Palumbo hit both Luger and Liz with a bat afterwards. This was awful. Russo and David did an interview. David talked about being neglected as a child. He got really good heat. It was weird because he was bragging about his long-legged blonde girlfriend and having a Corvette to show he hasn't done badly for himself. His real-life fiancée is Stacy Keebler, aka Miss Hancock, which was strange since Daphne was right there as a medium-legged brunette who is supposed to be his girlfriend, and not only that, who he just, earlier in this very same show, asked to marry him, that apparently based on this show, neither of whom we are supposed to believe he's ever seen sans clothing. They called out Anderson. Anderson did one of the best interviews of the year to build up for a match later in the show. They started a Thunder tailgating party idea, which was a smart idea to try and get people to think of Thunder as an event to attend as opposed to avoid, as it's been of late to wrestling fans. Funk beat Palumbo in another hardcore title match in 422. They ended up outside and Palumbo attempted to murder Funk by throwing him off a ledge. Luger saved the day and destroyed Palumbo, and Funk pinned Palumbo in a garbage can. Luger continued to pound on Palumbo until he got maced. Horace wrestled Kidman in a match where if Horace lost he'd have to retire. They are making people believe they honor the Stips. They've got until June 11th to convince people the Stip means something, because if they don't, they'll get no buy rate next time, by showing Smiley and Ralphus on a street corner with a sign and a tin cup saying "We'll wrestle for food." Bischoff was at ringside constantly changing the rules of the match a la McMahon to Mick Foley. Horace actually got the pin with a Death Valley driver, but Bischoff then said it was a death match. He turned it also into a handicap match with Konnan, Juventud Guerrera and Rey Mysterio Jr. involved. Of course, even 4-on-1 Horace was killing them until Bischoff hit Horace with a chair and they all piled on for the pin in 2:21 of the second match. There was no 10 count afterwards to signify a death match, but why quibble over details? Hogan, who was banned from ringside during the match, came in and beat up all four guys with some of the slowest mistimed, most embarrassing offense on record. Bischoff hit Hogan with a chair, which he no-sold. Nash came out and the four guys all ran for him. Russo then came out to confront Nash and basically tried to take 100% of the credit for the creation of the Diesel character that made Nash a star. Let's see, Russo got major influence on TV, by his own admission, in 1997 when the ratings bottomed out because of course he had no influence during that period they were declining. Diesel left WWF in 1996 after arriving in 1993. The blood fell from the ceiling, most of which fell several feet to the side of Nash and much of which fell on front row spectators. At least a little fell on Nash. Hogan and Nash then ran to the back and destroyed Russo and Bischoff's limo. David Flair beat Anderson in 2:14 after a ref bump when Daphne used a low blow and David hit him with the Statue of Liberty gimmick and Crowbar counted the pin. Rick Steiner and Abbott came out for an interview. Abbott was so bad on the interview. Chronic came out and they brawled. Show ended with Awesome beating Sting in an ambulance match when they were brawling on the ambulance and Sting delivered a reverse DDT. Sting opened the ambulance door but Vampiro was in the back and pulled Sting in, so Sting lost. Bischoff in front of most of the wrestlers this past week was really putting over how over Nash is as a single and Chronic are after just a few weeks of television. He said Nash is more over as a single now than at any time since he's been with the company. The real test of being over is generating either box office, buy rates of moving television ratings. Since at this point they still have no box office or buy rates to speak of, and what they have it's pretty clear isn't drawn because any performer is over, the only place to look is the TV ratings. The decibel level of a pop can be done because a worker with no box office appeal is really experienced at working the crowd, being put in the right position on a run-in that built heat, as a cool entrance gimmick, music, or they simply blow up enough explosives when they come out that it makes a big noise, or because fans like a familiar spot in the match. Scotty 2 Hotty's Worm or Rikishi's Dancing may get the biggest pop of a show except for Rock, but nobody would argue that Scotty 2 Hotty or even Rikishi sells extra tickets. People buy PPVs to see him or tune into TV to see them or their match in specific. There's nothing wrong with that. The prelims job is to entertain the audience, the main event's job is to put people in the seats and hopefully give them a reason to come back. He just does a spot on the show that the fans have been taught to react to out of familiarity. The Worm is over to the audience as a familiar spot, but really being over in the business sense is a totally different level. I've been to too many house shows before 1,500 people where the crowd is going crazy and 15,000 people making no noise at all, as has anyone who has been around wrestling for any length of time, to recognize the pop can't be used to define anything significant if the attendance, buy rate or TV audience movement isn't there. Vampiro signed his new contract for $250,000 per year as a base salary, $1,300 per house show, $4,000 per pay-per-view. For whatever reason, there has been a lot of conjecture about the age of Scott Steiner. He was born July 29, 1962, which makes him 37. Some recent claimed ages for him would have him graduating high school at the age of 13 and being a senior in college at the age of 18. UK TV numbers for April 27 through April 29 saw Nitro draw 170,000 viewers, Raw draw 400,000, Thunder, head-to-head with Raw, draw 170,000 and SmackDown 250,000. Regarding the Bill Goldberg cover of the recent Sports Illustrated for Kids magazine, the editors actually first approached WWF about having a photo of The Rock. According to Jim Byrne, of the WWF, when asked about an article in the magazine, they were told it would be a dual article including people from WCW. Byrne said the WWF turned down the request for a Rock photo because they didn't want one of their wrestlers to appear in the same photo spread as a WCW wrestler. Sources of SIFC were under the impression the WWF turned it down because they didn't want to do anything that would make it appear they are promoting toward children. Byrne said the WWF would be glad to work in the future with SIFC, but they don't want to be lumped with WCW. Speaking of Goldberg, the expected jealousy regarding him is rearing its head with some of the other top guys, and if you think of the obvious suspects you'll probably be very close, complaining about them pushing him through the monster truck gimmick when he himself isn't coming back for several weeks. Scott Steiner suffered a big knot on his head when Corporal Rexon's moonsault on the pay-per-view that was supposed to miss actually landed with a kick to his face. Steiner rolled in the wrong direction out of the way. There are a lot of wrestlers working hurt right now, such as Hogan, Flair with a shoulder problem, Konnan with the neck injury from a Nash powerbomb, and Guerrero has bad ribs to go along with his elbow which isn't fully healed. But unlike under past regimes, the attitude now, because of the feeling guys are getting a chance, is to work with injuries rather than use them as a reason to sit out as long as possible. Well, that and the fear of having pay cut in half. There is the obvious downside, chance of the injury not healing or because aggravated when working without allowing it to heal, not to mention the potential painkiller usage while trying to keep in the game while being hurt that stems from that, to this as well. Thunder tapings on May 9th in Springfield, Illinois drew 4,129, which was 2,980, paying $60,810. WWF May 21st Judgment Day pay-per-view from Louisville officially will be Triple H vs. Rock in the 60 Minutes Iron Man match with Michaels as ref, Benoit vs. Jericho in a submissions match, Big Show vs. Shane McMahon, Dudley's vs. X-Pac and Road Dogg in a tables match, Guerrero vs. Saturn vs. Malenko for the European title, Rikishi and Too Cool vs. Edge and Christian and Angle, and probably Hardys vs. Tanda. They're going to add some sort of a backstage match involving Gerald Briscoe defending the Hardcore title which he won on May 16th in Detroit on SmackDown as well. There will be fewer matches on the show than usual because they have a lot less time for an undercard because the main event is going so long. Raw on May 15th in Cleveland was a so-so show until the last half hour. The main event had that annoying overdone 1997 Survivor Series finish, but I'm guessing they needed to do it because they're going to tease it again as the finish of the Judgment Day match. By the way, in a clever move, if you click on www.judgmentday.com it takes you to the XPW website. Probably Rock is in a submission and Vince is ordering the bell to ring and either Michaels or Undertaker will save the day. Either that or Michaels can always turn on Rock. Or he can turn on Rock and Undertaker will save the day. Or Undertaker can turn on Rock. The possibilities are, well, not endless. Michaels returned. He seemed happy, people remembered him and talked about his school, his promotion, everyone raves about how well trained his wrestlers are, and his family. He retired as commissioner. Vince came out. Shawn said he was invited by Linda, shoved down Vince and said he was the ref. He said he was appointed official spokesperson for the WWF, which if it's a shoot, is just about the scariest thing imaginable. Michaels shoved down Vince so he could leave the show as a face, and then drove off in a limo. Dudley's beat Snow and Blackman in 307. The match fell apart and Ross even acknowledged that. They did the 3D on Snow. Dog and X-Pac attacked them, leading to Tori doing a plancha off the top outside, putting Bubba through a table. She landed stomach on Bubba. If she landed any higher, there would have been a nasty explosion with chemicals everywhere. Stephanie did a poorly acted promo. Angle came out. She went to hug him, but he just wanted to shake hands. Rikishi beat Angle in 1:13 when Edge and Christian interfered and Too Cool made the save. Godfather vs. Crash for the hardcore title ended up with Brown involved trying to win the title. One of the hoes, Bobcat, from Maryland, who had been working in Memphis of late, pinned Crash to win the title for a few seconds, but he rolled her up, pulling up her dress so you could get a good panty shot, and regained the title for the 43rd time. Vince, Stephanie and Triple H were doing an interview when The Rock returned. He doesn't have to do it because he can get away with anything, but it's time for Rock to come up with some new lines. Bob Holly beat Jericho in a hardcore match when Benoit interfered and put Jericho out with a Dragon Sleeper, and Bob hit him with a chair for the pin in 4:30. Shane came out, saying he wasn't a pussy, and challenged Show to a pay-per-view match with no DQ. Show came out and chased him before Tana came out for a handicap bout. It ended when Shane interfered, hitting Show with a chair for the DQ in 3:37. Shane then ran away with Show chasing. Shane fell down because Show was supposed to catch him. Fat bastard is so slow he still couldn't catch Shane before he made it backstage. Show brought Shane back out and threw him into the entrance structure, which looked like it hurt, and headbutted Tanda. Saturn and Malenko beat Guerrero and China in 5:06. Guerrero did some great wrestling here. China accidentally low-blowed him and Saturn got the pin with a brainbuster. Edge and Christian won a three-way over Acolytes and Hardys in 2:25 when Christian set up Matt for Edge to get the pin. Real good action, but too short. Main was Rock vs. Benoit in a submission match. Triple H and Stephanie and Vince were at ringside. They spent the whole show making fun of the fact Rock had never used a submission move in the WWF. Actually, he won one of his titles with a sharpshooter in the 405th remake of the 1997 Survivor Series finish against Mankind when Vince said to ring the bell. Benoit used a sharpshooter and they trying to tease that match. Seriously, it's 2000, and has anyone realized who won't give up dwelling on the match? And it's Vince, even bringing up Bret Hart's name. Rock used a figure 4 in an armbar. Lawler was so clueless that when Benoit had the armbar blocked, Lawler thought it was a submission hold until Ross explained it was a block. Triple H pulled Benoit to the ropes when he was caught in the figure 4. Benoit got the crossface on when Vince ordered the timekeeper to ring the bell at 6:50 and bullied poor Lillian Garcia to make the announcement that Rock had submitted. Triple H and Benoit beat up Rock. Rock made his own comeback. Vince tried to run away, but Jericho blocked the exit. Jericho put Triple H in the walls and he tapped out. Now that is putting somebody over. After a rock bottom on Benoit, DX ran in, but the Dudleys ran in with a table. Rock put Triple H through a table with a rock bottom to end the show. The main event elevated what had been a so-so show up to that point. SmackDown taping report from May 16th at the Joe Louis Arena in Detroit. In dark matches, the Dupes beat Rodney and Pete Gas, an unknown wrestler, who worked locally as El Fuego, beat Scotty Sabre, and Brian and Chuck Calding, who wrestle as the Cole brothers locally, beat Johnny Reyes and Elvis Elliott. For Heat, Bulldog beat Abs, Gangrel beat Richards, Rios vs. Taka turned into a tag with Rios and Lita over Taka and Funaki with a double moonsault finish, and Godfather beat Brown, but after the match Brown gave one of the hoes a power bomb and frog splash. SmackDown opened with the Boss and faction coming out. Stephanie vows Jericho will regret everyone he's said. Shane challenged Show to a match on the show. Triple H announced the stips for the pay-per-view. If the falls are tied after 60 minutes, the match is a draw and there is no overtime, so Rock would keep the title. Vince then talked about how gullible Linda was, teasing that Michaels was on his wide. Crash Holly went to the APA and told them he's going crazy for the 24/7 stuff because he can't even sleep, worried about people attacking him. He had the APA to protect him for 1 hour while he slept. They agreed and he went to sleep. Angle wrestled too hottie. Angle said that if he tried to do the worm during the Olympics, he'd never have medaled. Angle got the pin. China announced there wouldn't be the three-way advertised for the pay-per-view, but instead it would be Malenko vs. Saturn with Guerrero as ref, winner getting the shot at Guerrero on the pay-per-view. Malenko hit Saturn with the belt, but before he could get the pin, Guerrero hit Malenko with the belt. The match was ruled no contest, so the three-way was still on. Grandmaster beat Christian in a good match. The hoe from Monday, Bobcat, introduced herself as a former hardcore champion and tried to get in the room where Crash was sleeping, but the Acolytes stopped her. Venus complained about behind held back, and challenged the Benoit vs. Jericho winner at the pay-per-view to a title match on Raw on May 22nd. Bob Holly said Venus doesn't deserve a shot, and that he deserves the first show after the pay-per-view since he pinned Jericho on Raw. This sets up Jericho and Venus versus Bob and Benoit. Too short. Holly hit both Venus and Jericho with a chair for the DQ. Holly then hits Benoit as well with a chair and works on Benoit's knee with a chair. Benoit does a stretcher job, so he's injured going into the pay-per-view. Rikishi vs. Edge is more of an angle. They tease the stinky face on Edge, but Christian protects Edge by putting a goalie mask over his face. Angle and Christian interfered for the DQ and Too Cool made the save. They started to dance when the heels attacked them and did the dance and got great heat doing so. Gerald Briscoe and a sidekick called Joe C. Briscoe enter the APA office. The 1 hour was up so the APA and Joe C. left, so Crash was asleep and unprotected. Shane tells Show he's changed their singles match to a gauntlet match and brings out Test and Albert. Show beats them up. Shane then brings out Bossman and Buchanan. Then he brings out Dog and X-Pac so it's 6-on-1. Show ends up taking a pounding and Shane gets in the ring, stands on a chair and all the guys pick Show up and Shane acts like he chokeslams Show and pins him for the 3 count. Briscoe and a ref tiptoe into the room and the ref counts 3 on Crash so Briscoe is the hardcore champion. But they make noise leaving and Crash wakes up. It ends up in the ring with Crash beating up Briscoe until Patterson comes out. Crash breaks the broomsticks on Briscoe. Patterson pulls down his pants so we get to see his gross underwear again. Crash stops Patterson with a low blow and takes a broken broomstick and sticks it right up Patterson's candy ass as if Patterson was getting it from the rear. Rock cuts a promo saying he hasn't forgotten what Michaels did on the first episode of SmackDown. Main event was a lumberjack tables match with Rock vs. Dudley's. The Lumberjacks basically fought Rock and Dudley's, who fought together as a team against the Lumberjacks. A bunch of table spots and it basically turned into guys being eliminated when they went through tables. It ended up with Rock vs. Dog and X-Pac, and ended when Triple H gave Rock his own rock bottom through a table, and Vince announced that Dog and X-Pac were the winners. They did nothing to send the people home happy after the cameras went off. According to USA Today, they are thinking of remaking the Conan the Barbarian movies and that Dwayne Johnson is the first pick to play the new Conan, which is the same series of movies that catapulted Arnold Schwarzenegger to where at one point he may have been the biggest movie star in the world. Some notes on the SmackDown show on May 11th. Benoit carried Godfather well enough that it actually looked like Godfather was a good worker. The lengthy interview by Triple H dragged, although Vince was classic over-the-top Vince. When Lawler talked about China breaking up the Radicals and compared it to Yoko breaking up the Beatles, Michael Cole, in clearly a planned spot, came back saying that he didn't know Yokozuna had broken up the Beatles. Angle and Christian and Edge vs. Jericho and Hardy's was a real good TV match. Guerrero vs. Saturn looked like Saturn's best singles match since coming in. Acolytes vs. Bossman and Buchanan was a good brawl for what it was. The main event elimination match with Triple H and Road Dogg and X-Pac vs. Too Cool and Rikishi had tremendous heat. Fans were into Patterson's soiled underwear, and it's not quite as revolting seeing him holding them as seeing him actually in them, but it was still pretty gross. Undertaker is expected to return on the pay-per-view, if not, on Raw in the next week or two, to build for his first match back at King of the Ring. The Billboard Rec Sports tape sales chart for this past week has WWF in the top 7 spots, with the new Rock video at number 1, followed by the old Rock video at number 2, WWF Eve of Destruction, Austin vs. McMahon, Foley, Austin and Best of Raw. WWF had 15 of the top 20 with the only other pro wrestling video on the charts being the XPW video, at number 11. Big Show's knee has been bothering him as was pretty evident the way he was moving on TV. It's believed to be a torn meniscus that he's working TV on. He hasn't been working the house shows because of the injury. The movie Road Trip has a line when the guys are talking about Socrates and they called him the Vince McMahon of philosophy. And going back to the Survivor Series in 1997, Shawn Michaels did a lengthy interview regarding his career. He maintained that he knew nothing about the double cross ahead of time. He did admit that on November 4th, 3 days before the match in Montreal, Vince McMahon had called him up and asked him to do a big surprise, to lose the match in Montreal clean because nobody would be expecting it, and that he'd then win the title 1 month later in Springfield, Massachusetts. Michaels said that he told McMahon that he refused to lose to a guy who was going to go to WCW. McMahon during the week of Montreal had on November 4th, as that day's version of the finish, among the many different finishes discussed during that week, told Hart that he wanted him to win the match in Montreal clean to surprise everyone, and that Hart would lose the title in Springfield. He then called Hart back the next day and told him that Michaels had refused to do the job. The conjecture was whether or not McMahon actually ever proposed the idea to Michaels and Michaels turned it down, but this confirms McMahon was telling the truth about that specific story. WWF met with NCAA heavyweight champion Brock Lesnar again on May 11th. Lesnar has already started training with Brad Rheingans in Minnesota and people are raving about his quickness in the ring for a guy of his size. Vern Gagne showed up at least one of his workouts. Word is that athletically and looks-wise he's got it, but the personality is a question mark. Right now it appears WWF is the favorite, since they've already got his assistant coach in college, Shelton Benjamin, training in Louisville, where he'd be starting, and are also interested in another wrestler from the University of Minnesota team. New Japan is also in the hunt. WCW has met with him as well but appear to be the extreme dark horses. For Jim Cornette's June 23rd Rock and Rumble celebrating 30 years of pro wrestling at the Louisville Gardens, with the main event angles still not shot. Probably will be over the next week. The announced lineup includes Nick Dinsmore defending the OVW title against Al Snow, Kurt Angle versus The Collector, Sylvester Turkey, in what is billed as a shoot wrestling match. These two met in the finals of the NCAA heavyweight tournament in 1992 with Angle winning. Trailer Park Trash versus Flash Flanagan to determine the OVW Hardcore title. Bull Buchanan and Russ McCulloch versus Mark Henry and Mr. Black. Stan Lane and Steve Kieran managed by Jackie Fargo against Derek King and Jason Lee managed by Rip Rogers. Rico Constantino and local radio personality Charlie Steele versus Robbie D and local radio personality Tony Vanetti and a few other matches. On the WWF.com website, Jim Ross wrote about possible roster changes. Apparently some of the wrestlers, and if you figure these are the guys getting no push and only appear on syndication, are the guys who are possibly on the bubble, as there may be a few cuts. Tom Billington wasn't at the Insurrection pay-per-view at the last minute, because Chris Benoit was basically flying in for the match and out right after. He figured they'd have no time together, so decided against going. It had nothing to do with Davey Boy Smith being there. People are saying that the critical success of the book has really lifted his spirits. Chyna is the latest WWF performer to have her own comic book put out by Chaos Comics. The Aggression CD was number 41 on the charts this past week, selling 31,170 units. The Hollywood Reporter said that Austin will play a member of the Hells Angels in a movie about the life of Janis Joplin. The movie starts filming in August. Harry Venus, the mayor of Davie, Florida, has been training under Rocky Johnson, Rock's father, to work an angle for South Florida house shows with the Mean Street Posse. The stock closed on May 16th at $17.50 per share. SmackDown tapings May 9th in New Haven, Connecticut drew a sellout 7,670, paying $177,477. The sellout streak snapped at 9 in a row as the May 13th show in Cincinnati drew 6,340, paying $184,624 for a card headlined by Rikishi and Too Cool vs. Edge and Christian and Angle. Rock, Show and Triple H were all off the show. I believe Show was due to his knee injury and the other two had the night off, and I know Rock wasn't advertised and believe neither was Triple H. A few years back, when WCW was on fire, they had a streak of more than 20 sellouts in a row, which also ended in Cincinnati. May 14th in Columbus, Ohio drew 12,625, paying $373,941, headlined by Rock and Dudley's vs. DX. Merchandise was running at about an $8.04 per head clip. Whether it's the clash of titans in the ring or the drama that unfolds outside it, we're here to break it down, match by match, feud by feud. Remember, in the world of wrestling, every day is a battle, and every victory is a story waiting to be told. Until next time, keep the passion alive, and never stop wrestling with the possibilities. This is the Pro Wrestle Machine,